Good evening and welcome to the December 6, 2017 legislative session of the Town Board. And I'll ask that everyone please rise for the pledge, if you would, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, and I'll ask our clerk to please call the roll.
Cole. Here. LaFountain.
Here.
Metzler. Here. Moore.
Here.
Quinn.
Here.
We'll get started with communications and announcements. We're going to keep those relatively short this evening because there is a lot of folks here that want to speak to the issue of Shadow Pines, either for or against. But before I kick off that portion, I would like to recognize Mr. Krenzer, who's in the audience, and I'd ask our town board member, Paula Metzler, if she would further introduce this young man.
Once again, Troop 312 in Penfield is having their annual tree and wreath sale down at Bill Gray's. And we are so delighted again that they have asked to donate wreaths for the town hall or around the town properties again. So Paul is here, Paul Krenzer is here. I have to admit that I have a little bias for Troop 312 because Paul and his older brother and younger brother are my nephews, but they have worked very, very hard. I don't see them that much this time of year because they're down there selling trees and helping people load trees onto cars. So I'm going to let Paul give a little pitch if you can. Paul is a senior at Penfield High School, so he's been in Scouts for a long time. And if you want to give a little detail on the sale and a little pitch for yourself for all these people who may not have gotten trees or wreaths yet, and when they can go down and get them. And I'll take these for you. And we will find homes for these very quickly.
All right. So we're open every day, weeknights from 6 to 9 p.m., Saturday 9 to 6, Sunday 11 to 5. And all the trees, no matter what size they are, they're $40, and we also sell wreaths for $20. So hopefully you can get down and buy a tree.
Yeah.
So, and again, you're located where, Paul?
We're at Bill Gray's. We're in the parking lot is where we're selling the trees.
Right. Excellent. Thank you. I think this is the third or fourth year that the troop, at least the third or fourth year that you've donated wreaths to the town hall, and we'll put them on the east and west doorways as residents come in.
And I'd like to also recognize Troop 312 every year for our Memorial Day ceremony. They are the troop that steps forward and sets up the chairs and helps us out on the day. They're there to raise the flag and help us out in any way, and they come out, and a bunch of them come out on the holiday, on Memorial Day, to help us with that very important ceremony every year. So we're glad to have their help there, and also certainly appreciate throughout the year the Eagle Scout projects that these kids do are amazing. Many of the projects around town that have helped the town in our parks and our trails have been the result of Boy Scout Eagle projects that would not have happened without them and without their parents and their Scoutmasters. So we once again thank 312 for all they do throughout the year, and especially this time of year for the beautiful wreaths for the town hall. Thanks.
Thanks. Thanks, Paul. Thank you. Okay, we'll move on to communications and announcements, and again indicated that we have tapered those back from our normal communications and announcements. And earlier today, there was a press conference that we held here at the auditorium, and so I recognize a few of the faces that were here for that particular event. So I'm not going to recreate all of that. There are some brochures that, or timelines that were on the table right here. So if anybody has not gotten them, we can get some others, or you can go online, penfield.org, and under the project for shadows, that timeline is posted on that particular page as well. So I'm going to just hit a couple of highlights from the timeline that we talked about, and then certainly we'll get into any discussions that anyone has around that. One of the points that was made this morning is that you know, it's been 2 years. It's been 2 years and 1 week from the time that Dolomite closed to right now, and so a number of different things have occurred. Some in our control, some not in our control overall. But I will say that the town continues to at least have some dialogue with the seller. So we did establish a committee. That was a cross-section of residents from the town that we asked and charged with taking a look at what the town might do with that property and come up with some number of recommendations. That committee did so. They started in roughly the April timeframe and then completed in the September timeframe. During that time, the town also put a moratorium in place, and that moratorium was also extended. So the moratorium went in place in 2016. The town extended it to the end of March 2018. So the moratorium is still in place for that property. In and around the March 30th timeframe, we were able to receive our first letter of intent between the seller and the town as buyers. And some of the concerns that was in that was there was a no funding. It was an all cash, no opportunity to finance the process, and that they had concerns about having a bond referendum. The town indicated that was not, we could not do that. We had to move forward. I'm on record as saying a number of times that, our goal was to have a public vote, a public referendum where folks could come and vote either for or against. They were not willing to give us that ability for that, and they needed a drop-dead date for the sale. The town indicated that we could, provided we had that ability time-wise, we could do a bond vote and tie it to the general election, November 7th, this past November. And if it was an affirmative vote, then we would start the process of going to get our bonds and bonding for that. There was a period of time where we did not have a lot of input dialogue, between us and the seller, even though we attempted to find out, where we are we still on the same track, so on and so forth. So we finally got on September 20th a revised letter of intent to purchase, and at that point that put this board in a position to look at three different options in and around that, and they had a very hard timeline that we had to close with no extensions, but we had to close by January 31st. We had some concerns. We went back to the seller, indicated that there were some issues with that, and that we needed to work towards a public referendum. They came back and essentially said we're not going to do that. So this board asked to have that letter of intent signed, which was done on the 29th of September. And then from that point, the board took a look at a number of different things. So there was bonding resolutions, there was the environmental piece, because the environmental piece has to be completed before you could do anything with any type of bonding resolution, and the real estate component. So in good faith, the town moved forward with that, knowing that we had three scenarios that we had before us. The first scenario really got into if the board had a bond resolution, which we did on November 20th. We knew that that is subject to a permissive referendum. But in order to meet or get close to meeting the deadline that was provided by the seller, the best we could do, if everything worked perfectly on an expedited closing date, that we could not have all of our finance put into place until February 6th, about a week after the hard deadline. If we took a look at our second scenario as we went through, and that is that we did pass that resolution and it was subject to permissive referendum, that there is a 30-day period that we're currently in, that if there are the required number of signatures that are placed on a petition, that number is something less than 700. That's 5% of those that voted in the last gubernatorial race. That would, in fact, stop the process that we're in going for September 6th. It would then ask for a vote, and that vote, the earliest that we could have that vote would be February 20th. So the petition has to be in by the 20th of December. It requires 60 days minimum to get it up and available for a vote. That would take us until February 20th. And then to get all of the funding in place would take us until early April to do that. On the third scenario, if we had proceeded with the third scenario right after we adopted the bond resolution, we could move forward again. Would require the 60 days. We could do that a little bit sooner. It would be early March, so the three scenarios that we took a look at, all three were over the timeline that the seller had put in place by which we had to close, hard closing of January 31st. So as the board analyzed that, the discussion that we had is that there are certainly pluses and minuses associated with all of these. But the one that could be achieved closest to the closing date was adopting the bond resolutions on the 20th of November, which we did at a special meeting. And then the clock started for the permissive referendum. In all of these scenarios, the board has elected to continue to negotiate in good faith with the seller. And whichever happens, either scenario one or scenario two, there is still a need for us to go back to the seller to get an extended timeline. If they are willing to do that, then we can proceed accordingly. If they're not willing to do that, that will kill the deal, and then their intent is to sell the property. So a tough decision by this board because, again, I'll only speak for myself that I'm on record saying that a number of times to have a public vote. And in order to have the public vote, in that scenario 3, we would not be able to do that until early March. And hence the board took the approach of passing a resolution for the November 20th date with the idea that if a referendum comes in, we'll have further discussions with the seller to see if they would be willing to give the proper time to allow a public vote. and they'll either say yes or no. So I just wanted to go through that just briefly. Again, I indicated there are some timelines. So at this point, we're going to kind of take, so if you have the agenda, we're taking the communications and announcements component and public participation and kind of blending them. So we're going to jump right into the public participation. So there are slips to sign up. If you signed up, the clerk will in fact read your name, and if you would come up, in fact, if we might read a couple of names so that you can come up, and we have some chairs right here. And if you did not sign up, once we've gone through all of those that have signed up, we'll give you an opportunity then for you to speak. And we'll go through, the board's practice and policy is that we'll go through all one-time speakers before we start on second or third time speakers. So with that, I'll ask our clerk to start down the list that she has.
The first two speakers, Neil Madden and Sam Lembo.
Welcome, Neil.
Thank you, Mr. Supervisor, members of the board. So good evening. My name is Neil Madden, 10 Park Place, Rochester, New York. Yes, oh, sorry. Thank you. I'm not tall enough to get picked up by that. My name's Neil Madden. I reside at 10 Park Place in the town of Penfield. Appreciate the opportunity to talk to the board, kind of item one, and number two, speak to the voters of the town. Certainly at the press conference today, which I attended, and in other meetings about Shadow Pine, I sometimes sense a pretty high level of tension. So I think I'm speaking into the mic. I'm sorry. Is the mic on?
Yep, the mic is on, so you'll just
Okay,
have to get
I'll try harder.
as close to that as you can.
Okay,
Neil.
I'll try to swallow it.
I don't have any buttons. Our folks downstairs will get it as
Okay.
high as they can, you
Yeah.
know, without having feedback.
I guess I was saying I think we should all take a deep breath because I'm thinking that we all should commit, anybody who's speaking tonight or at any time to the board, to make our comments in a civil and respectful manner, even if we have disagreements. My wife and I have been residents of the town for 33 years. I guess maybe we're getting a mic that works.
Well, that one's working, but this one might work better.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Supervisor. As I said, my wife and I have been residents of the town. Is this better, folks? Thank you. For 33 years, residents of the school district, the Penfield School District, for 44 years. As I said, I want really first to talk to the board, especially in light of the supervisor's news conference that was held at 11 o'clock this morning. I attended that in hopes of getting clarification or a clear answer to questions that many voters that I've talked to over recent days have asked or posed, which is kind of along the lines of, why are we in such a mess now and all this tension? Why didn't we vote on this Shadow Pines borrowing of $3.65 million and the purchase of that land on Election Day, when we were all at the polls already? And the supervisor has, with the slides, has, I think, emphasized some of the points that he made at his press conference, and I want to applaud the town for providing the timeline they have. I think also this morning, perhaps in answer to a question, as I recall from the media, I think the supervisor indicated everyone is frustrated and unhappy in one way or the other about the current situation we are facing. The town board's unhappy or frustrated. Apparently the seller Dolomite has unhappy, those who want the town to buy Shadow Pines are unhappy, and those of us who want the opportunity to vote on the decision are unhappy. The town released this timeline, and I think there's some good information in there, and I thank them for posting it. But I do want to stress that to the board, that as I looked through the material, much of which I was familiar with and some of which I was only familiar as I reviewed your timeline, it still seems to me there are some gaps in what was presented at the press conference this morning, and there are some unanswered questions which I'm going to come to in a minute. Again, I think the other material I wanted to point out was if the referendum petition effort that's underway right now is successful, the earliest the town could close on a Shadow Pines purchase would be on February 6th. I believe that was what your material said. If I'm wrong about that, I stand corrected.
Without a petition?
Without a petition.
Without a petition,
Yep,
yes.
okay.
Yeah, if not enough people sign the petition.
Right, right.
And that you're continuing to negotiate in good faith on these deadline issues with the seller. And it does remind me of the column that appeared in the Democrat and Chronicle shortly after the board's November 30 vote, in which the columnist David Andriotta said, quote, "Of course there's wiggle room on this so-called deadline. The deadline wasn't set in stone of one of Dolomite's quarries. The deadline was on a 6-page, non-binding letter of intent that lets both parties out of the deal until a definitive agreement is signed. That agreement doesn't exist yet." And the timeline and list of what's going on confirms that negotiations still continue between the town and Dolomite on timeline, deadline, and other issues. Okay. If enough petitions are filed by the voters, over 685 or more, by December 20, the town board has to honor them. That was mentioned by the supervisor at the press conference. Therefore, a referendum, yes or no, will be held about February 20. If the yes votes outweigh the no votes, the town can go forward. They could close with Dolomite as early as April 2018, which again, I think was in the timeline. And I certainly assume and trust the town would continue to negotiate in good faith to get Dolomite to agree to those timelines. If the referendum is held because enough petitions are filed and the vote is no, the deal is dead. Now the timeline, the new piece of information I got out of the timeline is that Dolomite's first version of the final purchase agreement, the binding purchase agreement, was received by the town on October 25 of this year, and that the town's negotiations concerning that final agreement are still ongoing. So now I guess I really want to speak more to the voters of the town who are present here or are watching live TV on Channel 12 or will watch replays of this meeting or will check the video that might be posted on the town's website. I'm speaking tonight on behalf of Right to Vote Penfield, or you can see it at righttovotepenfield.com. And this is a grassroots group of concerned citizens who are currently circulating petitions to compel the town to hold this so-called permissive referendum on the board's November 20 special meeting decision to borrow $3.65 million to buy the Shadow Pines golf course. If we are successful in getting more than the required amount of signatures, for us, the good news and the purpose of this is all of the voters, and there are 26,500 registered voters in the town, all of the voters of Penfield will have the opportunity to vote yes or no on this matter. How did this group come to form? At the November 20 meeting where the board passed these resolutions to borrow the money to buy Shadow Pines, I spoke, as I'm speaking now at the beginning of the meeting, and I expressed my concern about the lack of transparency over the last several months that brought us to the board making the decision that night. Part of that lack of transparency as to that night was this was a special meeting of the board. The notice that appears on the website says it's the supervisor's ability to call a special meeting. I'm calling a special meeting for 7 p.m., November 20, 2017, to consider any matter that may come before the board. So if you think that tells you that Shadow Pines is going to be discussed, you're a mind-reading wizard. I started to see that there had been a number of special meetings that had similar notice or lack of notice, and then afterwards I would see that some of these wind-up steps the supervisor referred to were happening. So that morning of the 20th, I sent an email to the supervisor, and I said, I think the public's entitled to see the agenda of what's going to be discussed tonight. I think also the public is entitled to see the draft resolutions of what you're doing. And I cited a section of the state open meetings law. And then a lot of things started to be made public. The agenda was published mid-afternoon. The proposed resolutions that were adopted was available on the website in the afternoon. The supervisor's column, which for the first time indicated we don't have enough time, we're backing away, we're not going to, on our own, give you the referendum that we said we would. You'll have to get signatures. That was available. So, in any event, as a result of me doing this on November 20, being on TV, Channel 12, a number of people contacted me, and probably in the last, about 10 days ago, we started getting organized to petition the town to have a referendum vote so the public, all the voters, could vote yes or no. Our group is the only group that's advocating for the right of every Penfield voter to vote on Shadow Pines, regardless of whether, when the vote is held, you want to vote yes or you want to vote no. We're just talking about the principle that you ought to be able to vote. Now, to date, as far as knocking on doors or getting the word out, getting petitions to have the kind of public vote, that referendum, the results we're getting have far exceeded any hopes that we had. I've never done this kind of thing. I don't think, you know, the volunteers that have stepped forward have done this kind of thing. It's like running a little political campaign, but we're not one party or the other. We're just citizens out there knocking on doors. And one of the things that's been very gratifying is the response we get when somebody answers the door. We just tell them why we're there, which is, you know, we're not campaigning on the ultimate issue, yes or no. We're just saying, do you think you should have the right to vote or not? And the response is that, well, yes, you know, we should have the right. Over 90%, well over 90% of the people are saying, yeah, whether I think it's a great idea or I don't think it's a great idea, I think people should have the right to vote. And that's very encouraging, because isn't that the most basic premise of democracy? So we've got a good start, very good start. We want to give as many Penfield voters as possible the opportunity to sign this petition. So we're going to continue that effort to knock on doors through this week, through Sunday and next week. And by that time, we'll be close to this December 20 deadline to submit our petitions. Well, look, so to those of you here in the audience tonight or on TV, watching on TV, if you want one of our volunteers to contact you about signing a petition, please just leave a message on write-to-vote-penfield.com. We have a couple of volunteers in the back row, center aisle of the auditorium tonight, who are ready to witness the signature of any people here who haven't had a chance to sign the petition, who want to sign a petition. And if anybody's listening at home, and I know this is not too realistic, but if you want to try to drive down here before the meeting ends and you want to sign our petition, we'll stay here until we're kicked out of the auditorium. We're trying something a little different this Sunday from 2 to 4 p.m. We're going to be...
Point of order, please, Mr. Supervisor.
I don't...
Point of order. State your point of order.
Point of order is there a question in this?
If you would, Mr. Burns, I need you to have a microphone. Thank you.
Mr. Supervisor, well, I appreciate Mr. Madden's feelings about democracy and about the topic matter. This has been about a 15-minute advertisement so far, and I haven't heard a question yet for the town board. I've spoken before the town board, and sooner than this, you've asked me, okay, is there a question in there? So I would like to ask if there's a question that Mr. Madden would like to ask, and if you would ask it so that other people have an opportunity to speak, because I do know that there are other people who would like to speak tonight.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
I'll try to wrap up, but I was in the midst of saying, if again, there's any voter, registered voter in the town who wants to come to the Baird Road Community Center 2 to 4 p.m., we'll be in the atrium area, just inside the...
And you'll have that information on your website?
Yes, we will.
So, okay.
Now, I guess these are I do have some questions for the board, so thank you. I said I would, having looked at all of this stuff and listened to the press release, I do have unanswered questions. The timeline mentions these documents, and I'm specifically referring about in June 9, the town sent a letter to Dolomite saying, in sum and substance, the town would agree to hold a referendum on election day, November 7. Then we would be willing to close on or before January 31, 2018. I think this is the source of this 2018 document. It was tied to, let's have a vote on election day. Great idea, town, yay, very good, love it. Then the timeline talks about some email correspondence between town representatives and the in-house lawyer for the company that owns Dolomite. Basically saying, hey, what did you think of that June 9 letter? And the response is, Tony, I'll respond by Monday, although waiting for the November 7 bond referendum would be acceptable. We need to place some parameters on the closing date because the current structure does not contain a drop-dead date. Again, I forgot, I'll respond by Monday. This is June 23rd. It's a Friday. He's going to they were supposed to call back to the town on the 26th. The next thing in the timeline is July 28. It's a 5-week gap. This is, a very important thing. The town waited 5 weeks to, did you wait 5 weeks to, I'm making it in the form of a question, did you wait 5 weeks to follow up on what seemed like the parties were coming together on we'll have the referendum, November elections, we'll close January 31. I don't know, I don't understand that. If that had all happened, we had the vote November 7, clearly we wouldn't have all this angst around this holiday time of the year. I have copies of those documents, those emails back and forth, which weren't, again, the town said they can be made available to you, but if you want to look at them, ask me. Then next on this timeline, I think, which was, yeah, slide 4. Can I continue or not?
So,
I guess I'm pointing out, I don't think the town acted as promptly or as thoroughly as they could have. That's my perspective. There's next this 5-week
that's,
gap.
that's,
That's a judgment rather than a question.
I don't think it doesn't say this is question period. It said this is public comment.
Raise the question as to why, or did you not?
Okay, the next question.
Because I can answer the question.
Okay. Anyways, there's this 5-week gap. Then the next gap is July 28 to 9/20, 8 weeks. The town doesn't seem to have, made any communications. You're waiting for Dolomite to get back, or it appears you are, and that's when we get into this whole deadline thing. Again, to the town's credit, you wrote a great letter on the 29th of September objecting to their deadline, their draft letter of intent, their non-binding letter of intent, pointing out the town cannot meet the legal requirements to hold a bond referendum with such a deadline. And then at that letter you say, hey, we'd be glad to do the referendum March 13th, 2008, with closing 90 days thereafter, June. Same day, after, I think, putting on a very good case, why would the town then say okay to the unreasonable, in my perspective, letter of intent? Why did you cave into them? That's a question. And here's my final question to the board, and then I guess I have one last comment.
Well, wait a minute. I want to back you up just 1 second.
Okay.
Since you said you had a question. Who was caving to who? I want you to clarify that, because this board has not caved. We are negotiating in good faith with a seller to the best of our ability.
I'm sorry you take offense at that. That's my perspective.
Okay, well,
of it.
I just want you to know that that's not my perspective.
That's fair enough. The last unanswered question I've got, the question is, so then I think in your slides, you said, hey, then the town had to make a decision how to proceed. So apparently on or shortly after September 29, you decided to go ahead without setting this up with a referendum because you had a time concern. That was apparently it. So why did you wait 7 weeks after 9/29 to announce 5 hours before your November 20 meeting that the referendum that was going to be kind of automatic or within this board's authority to grant couldn't be done? The citizens would have to go out and get petitions signed. My last point, one last point. So, I don't do
Well,
Facebook.
I'd like to, one other thing, Neil.
Okay, go ahead.
I mean, hindsight is 20/20.
Yes, it is.
Okay.
We're
I
here
think
where we
everyone
are.
in the room could go back to any point on this timeline and say, hey, in 4 or 5 months we'd be here, so why don't we do something different? Unfortunately, we don't have that ability to do that.
That is unfortunate. We are here.
Okay. The first time that time became an issue
Yes,
was when we received the September 20th letter of intent from Dolomite.
right.
That's when time became an issue. Up until that point, We have been negotiating in good faith with the seller to the best of our ability. When we received the letter of intent on September 20th, that is when we had a deadline imposed upon us that we have been negotiating since September 20th to extend. We have not been successful. We are continuing to do so.
I appreciate
Through your process, through the permissive referendum process, we are continuing to negotiate to get that deadline extended. So time was not an issue back in March or April or May. We were negotiating in good faith with the seller. So I think it's important that when you say all this time, once time became an issue on September 20th, we moved as quickly as allowed by New York State law to meet every deadline that we needed to in order to be prepared to close by January 31st of 2018. If we had missed one of those deadlines or did not have a special meeting at some point along the timeline, then we would have blown past the January 31st, 2018 deadline by the seller, and we have no idea, even today, if they're going to honor that or not. That was a risk that we could not take. Speaking for myself, that was a risk I was not willing to take. So time became an issue on September 20th of 2017, and since then, we have been working as quickly and as efficiently as possible to put the opportunity before us to own this land, which we have heard nonstop for 2 years. The overwhelming majority of residents in this town have been wanting this land.
I object to that. I object to that, too.
How
do you know it's a majority?
Gentlemen,
No, please.
gentlemen, excuse me.
Let's be
We-
calm.
Subjective.
I had
Gentlemen,
an answer to my question, and I think people can evaluate that.
everybody
answer.
will have an opportunity
Yeah.
to speak.
Yep.
Subjective comment.
It's
Excuse me.
subjective.
Excuse me.
It is.
Gentlemen.
We don't need to get into this. Again, let's take a deep
Absolutely.
breath.
Everybody will have the
Appreciate
right
what
to
you said.
voice their opinion one way or the other.
Yeah.
So,
Thank you.
continue, Mr. Madden.
Hey, my last thing, and again, believe you me, I do not do Facebook, but some people who know me have brought to my attention some comments on the Save the Shadow Pines Facebook, and one of them is the idiot pushing the petition and going to the news is Neil Madden, a real estate attorney. And I think saying I'm an idiot is certainly protected free speech. That's anybody's opinion. And similarly, Neil Madden is trying to botch the deal because he has so much to gain if it turns into a housing development. I just want to say this, and again, this, I think we all talk about how maybe in the world of social media, which I don't do, it's unfortunate we can't have, as I said at the beginning, a civil conversation even if we differ. So the truth is, I am a retired lawyer. I've been retired for 6.5 years. When I was practicing, I did represent clients who applied at different municipalities around the area for planning and zoning approvals. I have never, in over 35 years of doing that, represented any residential developer in the town of Penfield. I don't have any clients. I'm retired. I don't have any financial interest. I'm not fronting for Ryan Homes or Combat Construction or any other entity. So, I just put that out there because to the extent it's out there that somehow I have some money to be made here, it's not what's motivating me. My only goal in being involved in the group that's circulating petitions is to get the right to vote for everyone in Penfield. So that's all we're saying. Now, there is an interesting quote you can pick up off of the internet from an active member of Save Shadow Pines after the person had an unsuccessful effort to become elected to the town board in 2013. And that quote is, we invite you to get involved, follow the news, attend town board meetings. Most of all, continue to exercise your right to vote and encourage your friends and neighbors to vote. So I guess my question, does it seem to others a little hypocritical for Save Shadow Pines to oppose allowing other citizens to at least go out and petition for the right to vote on this topic? Again, you want more information? Anybody who wants to volunteer to sign a petition, go to righttovotepenfield.com. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker, please.
Sam Lembo.
Mr. Supervisor and members of the board, I was at the press conference today.
Excuse
My
me,
name
can
is Sam
we have your
Lembo.
address
I
too,
live
please?
at 7 Hickory Lane. I've been a resident of Penfield for 50 years this year. I'm retired. I'm also involved in Neil's petition because I believe everybody should have the right to vote, especially for a $3.65 million project. I don't think a bunch of people sitting at this board can represent the members, the 26,000 people of Penfield, being objective about how they feel without a vote. And I would like to see people in Penfield at least vote. I don't care one way or the other. Just I think we all need our right to vote. I don't have anything else to say.
Thank you, Sam. Our next speaker, please.
Kathleen McGrail.
My name's Dr. McGrail. I'm 275 Parkview Drive, resident of Penfield for 40 years or so. And I don't have any conflicts of interest here as a retired physician. Yep, I don't have any conflicts of interest as a retired physician here. I do want to make an offer. My questions were related to the 2020 group and not to Shadow Pines. They are very concise and to the point, but this may not be the time that you want to address these. I would leave it to the audience about whether or not they want me to ask these questions now or defer to Shadow Pines people.
This is really, at this point, we're doing the Shadow Pines first, Doctor, so I would
Okay. I would
just
say
ask-
that I submitted these questions before the November 15th meeting, but they weren't answered, so.
Okay.
But I will give way to Shadow Pines.
Great, thank you. Thank you very much.
Jim Mathers.
I'll first try to work with this. My name's Jim Mathers. I live on Creek Hill Lane. Lived in the town about 40 years now. And I believe I was last here regarding Baytown development. And I gotta bring up the similarities of that process to this process with Shadow Pines, and the only reason I got involved. This really isn't in my backyard quite so tightly this time. But I really gotta object to the process and how some of these things go on for months and months and turn into years, and then all of a sudden in 90 days, this is a solution path and off we go. There's some transparency issues, and that's the reason I'm here tonight, and people will make up their mind, but it's the transparency of even this timeline. I looked up for this on the website all day. I didn't see it till I got here. I only heard about it this morning in the press conference. It's just like the November 20th meeting. It's announced the day that some serious things are transpiring. And how you call that transparency is, I think you have to do a little reflection on your own. I heard comments that the seller's deadline submarine this project. Well, it might be, but I think the process that we're going through here right now may submarine the project. The seller's deadline, as you mentioned, was September 20th, as I understood it. And I just, my first question, or the one I want to end with, is some of the timeline issues. But I think what's submarined the project is now that only 700 voters can submarine this project, where it at least took a few thousand before. And from afar, I was neutral to even positive on this. In the grand scheme of things, of $10, $15 on your taxes is not going to break up anyone in Penfield, I don't believe. But the way you've gone about this, I got to stand against it right now. Hopefully, there's resolution and everybody gets their compromise. But the way we've gone about this, and for 2 years, I don't blame the seller for being upset. He's been landlocked for 2 years. He's got to put a deadline. I don't blame the guy at all. One thing before I close is I would never even vote for this in a public referendum if there's not some kind of document outlining the future use of the project. I hear government usage. Is that going to be a retirement home for the town board? I'm sorry, you got to put a few guidelines on what that is going to be when it's all said and done, whether it's owned by the town or we lose it. But just government usage, that's very naive, I think, without having some type of documentation in place for a voter to look at, even if we were voting on it, as we normally would. And I was going to close with a question that I think Neil brought up there, is in the timeline, even when I look at this, I wanted to know what went on between September 20th and November 20th. September 20th was 120 days between the seller's deadline of January 31st. I've heard advertised a referendum would take 60 to 75 days to organize. Why couldn't we moved out by October 1st, doing a lot of these other things in parallel, the purchase offer, the inspection of the land, and I understand the environmental issues, but why couldn't these things be done in parallel? I'll ask that as a question. I would also like to know if scenario 2 is even viable that's up there today.
We don't even know if scenario 1 is viable. It's past the January 31st, and thus far, the seller has held firm. So we don't even know if scenario 1 is viable, because they would have to extend the timeline, and right now they have indicated they are holding firm.
You're saying that it's impossible for the town to even close by January 31st?
We're continuing to negotiate with the seller to get them to extend the timeline.
What?
But as
I
of
don't understand.
As of right now, they have not indicated that they would be willing to do that.
I don't understand why that date is not possible for the town to comply with, January 31st, 2018.
So, Mr. Horowitz, would you like to?
Not like buying a house.
There are legal requirements that have to be met to hold referendums.
You've already told us we're not going to have a referendum.
If I can answer the question.
I just said you've already told us that you've decided to not have a referendum, I believe. Am I correct?
If I can answer the question to the best of my ability, okay? February 6th is the earliest that we could close. We cannot close by January 31st because of the preliminary legal requirements that had to be completed. We had to do an environmental review that had to be completed before this board could pass a November 20th permissive referendum. And then there's a statutory 30-day period that is required to allow people to petition the board to hold a vote. Then there's 60 days beyond that is the earliest time a vote could be held if there is a permissive referendum. If there isn't any petitions, then we can go ahead and move toward a February 6th closing. But there is a required legal notice of estoppel that has to be given that's at least 20 days. Then we have to go to the bond market to prepare and send out an official statement. Then we have to go to the bond market to sell municipal bonds to obtain the money, similar to a mortgage. If a person was going to get a mortgage from the bank, we have to go to the bond market and sell these things. And the expedited date to do all those steps takes us beyond January 31st, 2018. That's the answer why we can't meet that even under the most expedited terms. The board made a decision that coming as close to January 31st, that was stated in a letter of intent, would be the most probable, likely term that the seller might eventually accept. That hasn't happened yet. Did I answer your question or not?
You answered my question, but does all these fine people that's in this audience has worked on ideas of what to do with this land and how to go about that and worked on that for 2 years? Did they know all those restrictions that you're up against?
No, they're
and
not
what
lawyers.
kind of timeline it would take to even purchase the property? Was that public information?
You're assuming they're going to change the date.
Excuse me, we got, the gentleman has the floor.
Fine.
Thank you.
That was my question. You know, that's revealing. I don't argue with it. But, you know, you're locking the guy's land up for 2 years. Didn't you expect him to say, are you going to buy it or not? And know that it takes 6 months, 9 months?
Sir, we did not get any indication from the seller, despite starting
That's not what I said.
No,
Go ahead.
I can finish, please. We did not get any indication from Dolomite that they were willing to sell it to us with a financing contingency until September 20th, because before then, they said, no, we would not allow you to go to the bond market, and we did not have the money to close. So the first time this board heard from Dolomite that they were willing to sell to us and we could have our financing contingency was September 20th. Would you like to hear our response? I think it's in the materials.
No,
Why not?
because I've heard enough. I think with some...
Well, I'm going to say
Go
what
ahead.
we responded. September 29th, we wrote them and said, January 31st is impossible. It doesn't meet the legal requirements to hold our financing referendum that we've asked you 5 times to allow. And so we responded to them and said, we need to have until March to hold the vote. 5 or 6 times we wrote to Dolomite saying, we insist we must have a public referendum. We didn't get the opportunity to set the public referendum on our own, which would have taken 60 days. And on September 20th, in order to set a bond referendum, you have to complete environmental review. This board hired consultants, hired engineers, hired attorneys. Right October 11th, after the September 29th date, that Dolomite said to us, we will not give you the time that you requested till March to hold your public referendum. You got to get going right away. So that's what this board did to try to keep this transaction alive for the community. So it takes 60 days legally to call for a referendum on the board's own motion. That can only be done after a compliance with the state environmental review law, and that needs a consultant's review, our review. That got, from September 29th, that got done by November 15th. And then we went on and did hold a bond resolution, but we didn't have time to do it to come anywhere near the hard deadline that this seller said, and said time of the essence, which in the real estate community is, time is very important. So we've been after them and after them for extensions to allow a bond vote on our own motion. We could never get them to agree to it. We are trying still to get them to extend and make the arguments that we've all heard here. It's important to vote. We are still attempting to do this.
And just an example I'll give from the timeline, if some of you may not have caught up on it, or caught it, is that the September 29th date, that was a Friday. And Dolomite said, you need to tell us by tomorrow. Saturday.
Take it or leave it.
Take it or leave it. And so you also
Well,
must
you
keep
had 9 days before that. You had the letter September 20th, didn't you?
September 29th was their response saying you've got 24 hours to Saturday.
What date did you have the letter in your hand?
We had it on September 20th, they gave us 10 days. 10 days
Well, why you
by
tell
the
me?
September 30th. Well, we have to think about the fact that we couldn't do the public referendum by January 31st. So we sent them a response to
the
say,
29th.
your terms of your September 20th, take it or leave it, are not acceptable. We can't do it. We can't legally hold our bond vote. That's why it took time to fashion the letter, to go through all the history and try to convince them that that was the right thing to do. We're still trying to do that.
And they told us you have 24 hours to accept our terms.
You know, the 9th day to the 10th day.
Yeah, but that was all non-binding anyway, correct?
It's still non-binding.
Understand that we have been negotiating with the seller of a very important parcel in our community that can pull the plug at any time, including as we speak.
Understand, but it's been 2 years
So
or
when there
more.
are any,
You're assuming that we have a willing seller. And I agree with you. I mean, we would like to have a willing seller, but history has proven, I mean, based on the dates that we're looking at and the documentation that's been provided, you know, on March 30th, the very first time, you know, Dolomite submits a letter of intent and they say no financing contingency. This could all be over with today. If they allowed us to have a financing contingency on March 30th, we wouldn't be here today. But they didn't.
It's essentially like somebody telling you when you bought your house, you can't get a mortgage. You have to pay us cash.
And trust me, we're as frustrated as anybody in this room on this process. And we can go back and rehash dates and to the hour and to the day and to the month, but the facts are the facts. And if on March 30th, when they first sent the letter of intent, if they would have allowed a financing contingency so we could do a public referendum, it is my opinion that we would not be here today. And the issue would either be resolved on a yes vote or a no vote. We all want a public referendum. I don't think anybody up here disagrees with that, but our backs are against the wall with a deadline, whether it's, you know, I've heard it's non-binding. Well, that could be true from a legal perspective, but we're not getting anything from Dolomite that's saying, yeah, you know, you guys are right. Why don't we give you till March 30th or April, whatever, to do a public referendum? We only know what they're telling us. And some of the facts in here are really disheartening, especially the facts concerning Ryan Holmes. You know, what's going on? It really begs the question, what is going on? Who's having conversations with who? And what is the real intent behind this? And so, I mean, I'm as frustrated as anybody. I think everybody up here is as frustrated. But let's just not forget a very simple fact. On March 30th, 2017, the letter of intent that came to the town board, if they allowed a financing contingency, I believe we would not be here having this discussion today. We could have put it up for a vote. We probably could have met the supervisor's desire to have it on November 7th, Election Day, probably an appropriate day to have the vote, and we'd be moving along in the process. We all would have liked that to happen. But there's multiple occasions here, that's just being one, but also on March 26th, we were denied again an opportunity to have a public referendum.
May 26th.
I'm sorry, thank you, May 26th. You know, and then again on September 20th, we were denied the opportunity to hold a public referendum. And on September 29th, we were denied the opportunity to hold a public referendum. So, I mean, I'm sounding very frustrated. Dolomite did that.
No.
And so, you know, we're trying to work through this. And,
We have, gentlemen have the floor.
you know, and I know I'm going on, and I apologize, because I'm very emotional about this, and I just want to make it very clear. Absolutely, a lot of people are. It is what it is with the seller. We can't force this seller to meet a timeline that works for us. We can't force this seller to sell to us. And there's documentation here that shows that there may be other conversations going on outside outside of selling it to the town of Penfield. I'm not making an accusation, I'm stating a fact that there are, based on what we have here. And it's unfortunate, but this could have been resolved back in March, and it wasn't. And that's why we're here today, trying to figure out. But this board, with the leadership of the supervisor and the town attorney, we continue to try to negotiate with Dolomite Oldcastle for an extension so we can have that public vote. Make no question about it, and I want to be perfectly clear. We continue to proceed in that direction until we're told no. Until we're told no. But that is the commitment that we have made, and that's what we're trying to do in all of this.
Sounds to me like the solid.
I got the floor, sir.
Other questions, Jim?
Seriously.
Other questions?
Yeah, I have one final question.
Yes, sir.
Was this March and May dates and stuff disclosed to the public, the residents of Penfield?
Yes, it has been
On the
Where
website.
do I find that information?
in the timeline.
And on the
I
Shadows
got that
web-
today.
On the Shadows website.
You've been working on
all
this for 2 years.
All the correspondence has been on the Shadows website, project on the website.
I think March of 2016 is the last date.
Sir, when it comes to the negotiation of real estate transactions, those are things that are typically done between a seller and a buyer, and there's valuation.
I'm a buyer, I'm a resident.
Yes, and there are valuation issues and so on and so forth. So those negotiations are conducted between the buyer and the seller, and when it becomes that we have a real deal, then everything gets communicated to the public. We still don't have a real deal.
You made a real deal here.
There isn't.
We are the residents of the town, and you need to transmit information.
And you know what, Mr. Mathers?
and
We
you
wouldn't
wouldn't
have
be
a-
in this shape
We
right
wouldn't
now.
have a seller anymore.
Okay. I
We
can't
wouldn't have
fix
a
your
seller
problem.
anymore.
I yield my time to a lot of other people.
Thank you,
Yeah.
Jim.
I think there's a lot of
Thank
people
you.
who I know I've spoken many times on this topic that I'd like to hear from again.
Can we
Next,
go to our next speaker, please?
Les Gamby.
Hi, Les.
Hello. Les Scamby, 2181 Baird Road, and I can firmly say that I am not sure what should be done with this property. I'm not sure I'm a yes, I'm not sure I'm a no. But I would like to say that I was really happy when Mr. Moore said the town board would be happier if there was a referendum. I think that would be the best way. Everybody would be happy. And it actually was quite a relief when I found out you would be happier doing that. So I do have a few questions and observations. Number one, the bond would be for 30 years if we were borrow money for it?
It's a blend, it's 29 or so,
Okay.
something in that.
So that the yearly expenditure on principal and interest would be more than $100,000 but less than $200,000 a year?
I don't have the maturity schedules in front of me.
Okay, well, I know it's got to be more than 100,000 because 30 years would be less than, it'd have to be more than 100,000 a year. So that's what would be getting spent. And my understanding is the only utility that's been specific has been to not have a development on the land. Everything else is future use.
So just to make
How
sure,
the land would be used is, I may not be fully informed, in fact, I'm sure I'm not. The only thing I have seen is we want to not have development on the land, and beyond that, there's been no specific use put out there.
Well, I think one thing that's missing here, and I don't mean to interrupt or
Oh, no,
train
that's
of
okay.
thought. When we talk about, 2 years, we had a moratorium committee that met hours, residents who met hours and came up with a report to the board,
Okay,
including recommendations.
okay,
Part of those discussions and part of the reason why we had certain folks, stakeholders on that committee was to give suggestions as to what might happen given certain descriptions of the property. The number one recommendation from the committee to the town board, we accepted their report, was open space recreational use
Another park?
for that parcel.
Okay.
And I have to commend the committee for all the work they did, because I'm seeing folks I know attended committee meetings, and I appreciate that. I certainly understand if folks are just coming into the fold now, and that's fine, just hearing about this issue, but we cannot negate the work that we had residents do on this committee over the course of over a year of meetings and getting together and having dialogue from the school district, from neighbors, from other stakeholders. So that's where, as far as the uses,
Excuse me, Sam, you know what? Sam, excuse me, no one interrupted you. Give everyone else the same courtesy. That's part of the problem, I think, that we have these days and how people treat other people.
Excuse me, it's probably because of your process. It's not very good.
No, it's you.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
and I would add that so many residents gave input to that committee, and I thank all of you who did that, because that makes our job not easy, as you can see, but easier. And what we are doing today, and why we press so hard for a public referendum, and I'm getting choked up, I'm sorry, is that we heard that committee, a cross-section of people, as to what, and they had people submitting, we had a way for people to submit through our website, comments, suggestions. So I think it is a disservice to those folks, and the folks who have stepped up since then to really embrace this issue, to come forward and now, make it appear that this is some sort of rush job, when I know there are folks sitting out there that know that's not the case, because they worked very hard on this.
Well, my concern with respect to that is, $3.5 million compared to a lot of other projects that are capitalized isn't that big. I know that, because school buildings cost a lot, other public buildings cost a lot. That's not actually that big a number, but my thoughts are, I want to see some good utility, get it put to good use, appropriate use, maybe not all parkland. I can tell you that we are raising a lot of very healthy deer on that land. They cross the roads constantly, and they're fast and strong. They're good-sized. And they're the residents of Penfield that are getting the most utilization out of that land right now. I'm not concerned about whether we vote yes or vote no. I'm glad, as I said, I was glad to hear that the board wanted there to be a referendum. And in the future, whenever possible, maybe learn from this experience and push even harder for a referendum in the future, because I think you've kind of learned that there's a lot of unpleasantness with this that came along. And I don't put most of this at the feet of the board. I've been listening to a lot of new things in the last 3 weeks. And the one question I want to leave with is, what would be the negative impact to the town if we just said to the seller, like other people in real estate transactions, thank you very much, we're just not going to do it? And I don't know what would that be?
To echo the committee, the moratorium committee?
To just say, no, I mean, to the seller, we're not going to buy it. I just don't know what the negative result would be to the town.
The result would be a very large, dense residential development that would have a massive effect on our infrastructure, on our schools, on our traffic, and on our future. I believe this goes farther than your next tax bill. This is a future, we need to look beyond that and look at the future of this community across, it goes beyond that.
And that's far beyond the purview of anything I'm prepared to comment on, so
Well, I
have
would
to
invite you to
stop.
stay informed, and I'm hoping ideally that if we can get the seller to extend that deadline to where we can have a public referendum, which we all have wanted to have from day one, then I invite you to participate in the process after, hopefully, as to what should be done on that
I
property.
believe that that would be the best way for everything, if at all possible.
You got it.
Because even if the result were to go in a way that I didn't believe it was supposed to, if the vast majority of the town voters went against my opinion, I would still feel very comfortable with that result, because it followed reasonable steps.
And you still would be welcome to be involved.
Okay. And as far as the amount that would be outlaid per year, maybe you can figure that out.
Oh, we have that.
Oh, you do?
We do have that information.
How much would that be approximately?
I mean, I don't have the sheet
Okay.
with me, Les, but that is something that we could put up on the website.
That would be
on
helpful
that-
for people to be informed.
on that project page for the shadows.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
That's it.
Absolutely. Thanks, Les. Thank you.
Christina Emmerine.
Hi, Christina. Welcome.
Hi, I'm Christina Emmerine, and I live on Thorn Tree Circle, and I don't know if tonight's the best day to talk about it, but I wanted to talk about the safety of Penfield children regarding pesticide usage. So
If
I
you'd
know
like to,
obviously it's about Shadow Pines, but it's also, I think, an important issue for Penfield. Would that be okay?
so right now, I think we're trying to kind of keep it to the Shadow Pines piece. Right after that, we'll get into, we've got a couple of other speakers that do have some interest and would welcome that dialogue if you're able to wait for a short time.
Okay, thank you so
Great.
much.
Thank you, Christina. Thanks. Next speaker,
No
please.
one else has
All
signed
right.
up.
So I've got Sam Ogie first, and then I've got Mr. Burns second. So,
Hello. Does this mic work for everybody now? Yes. Okay, my name's Sam Ogie. I live at 1924 Clark Road. I will ask just a series of questions and allow you to answer them. First, are you aware of the Central School District memo of May 2016 that was prepared for the moratorium committee that concluded that the proposal for housing development that they reviewed from Ryan Homes would be 255 homes, and that even after the taxes generated by those homes, the school district would be left with a shortfall of between $675,000 and $1.9 million per year? Are you aware of that?
Absolutely.
I bring that up because I can understand why the town would not publish those numbers. But at the same time, publishing what you did, that purchasing the property is going to cost taxpayers $14 per year, $3.6 million total, only gives half the story. And I would be surprised if the volunteers who are canvassing to try to get those petition signatures, I'd be very surprised if they were actually sharing the other half of the financial question. And I'll just say this for people who are watching. If you sign the petition and it kills the deal, we know that there will be Ryan Homes. We know because they prepared a proposal before the moratorium happened. We know that D'Amico, the head of Combat Construction, who works with Ryan Homes, talked to the press in September and said he fully intends to buy it when Penfield fails to buy it. And we know that in September you were contacted by Ryan Homes trying to show you a proposal. And we have an analysis from the Central School District that the increase in property taxes for the schools from that development is expected to cost much more than the $100,000 to $200,000 per year that it would cost to buy the property. And so my comment is I would encourage you to actually include that information in publications, because people are only hearing half of the story on that. Second question, do you have any indication from Dolomite that they are willing to move the deadline?
Everything is in negotiation at this point.
Okay, because we hear a lot of speculation that obviously that date can move. Apparently, David Andriotta knows that Dolomite would be able to move it, but I haven't seen anything that you've written that indicates Dolomite has given you any indication that they're willing to move the deadline.
We can't speculate what Dolomite might be doing with other prospective buyers or what their internal negotiations amongst themselves might be. And, you know, we can say that it's somewhat surprising that, you know, a little bit of extra time won't be given to be a good neighbor in the community and to continue good relationships with the town in which Dolomite operates. So when I could understand, I think, why anyone would say, well, come on, you know, who won't give a little bit extra time? Right now, we're not being given that extra time, and I can only speculate as to why that is.
Is it correct that you have asked them more than once for a date later than January 31st?
About 5 times,
Is it also correct that they have always said no?
yes.
So
Thus
is
far,
there
that is
any
correct.
way a reasonable person could conclude that they would obviously say yes in a future date? Okay, I'll leave that.
And Sam, that's the most frustrating part of this whole process, is the moratorium runs through the end of March. Why there's the deadline of January 31st, I don't know. It makes no sense to me. I'm not sure we have an answer as to why that is the case. So, yeah, I mean, that's without question the most frustrating part of this whole process, is that there's a date, it seems hard and fast, that, no, there's no indication that we're going to be able to move that. And that's, again, when we were looking at the options before us back in September, October, and November, under the assumption that that deadline was not going to be extended, we had to set the ball in motion to where we are today.
Okay. Thank you. So if we assume that Dolomite will continue to refuse to extend that date, and I'm asking this question to get to a follow-up question, is there anything that the town can do to force an extension?
No, I don't believe so.
A contract to buy and sell real property is not subject to a gun. It's
Sorry.
So am I. I'm sorry. Sam had asked, is there any way we can force a seller to agree to an extension? And it's like a contract. If you were to buy your home, you can't put a gun to the seller's head and say, you must accept my terms. No, we cannot force them. We are trying to convince them. I think the fact that there are citizens so upset in this community because they have not been able to get the right to vote, and we're all frustrated about this, and a petition by citizens is circulating around demanding the right to vote, we're hopeful that we can convince the seller to give us the time necessary to complete that process. It has always been our intent to do that process in order to authorize the necessary financing for us to buy the property if the community wanted to do it. So we're still working on that.
Okay, so that's what I thought the answer was, is that no, there is nothing the town can do to force Dolomite to extend. We have no reason to believe that Dolomite intends to extend because they've said multiple times no. And that leads me to my next question. Is it reasonable to conclude that if this petition achieves the 685 signatures, that will effectively kill the deal and will not lead to an actual vote, but will lead to Dolomite pulling out of the deal? Is that a reasonable conclusion?
If they're not willing to extend that closing date, that is a reasonable.
And we have no indication yet that they're willing to extend that closing date.
I think it's reasonable to conclude that, and it's logical to think that if they are not willing to budge on any extension, they're not willing to budge on an extensive extension, which is what a full public referendum, which we all wanted, but the effect of that, if you think just logically from, you know, an extension, if they're willing to not willing to budge a little bit, then we need to give them a really good reason in good faith negotiations to do so. And that was certainly a thrust behind our very reluctant decision to move the way we did, to move forward with the process of purchasing negotiations while not letting other we wanted to let the fewest deadlines pass as possible. We didn't want to miss the mark. So that what led us to our very reluctant decision at that point.
So I ask these questions just because I think it's important. Certainly, everyone has a right to sign the petition, and I fully understand why people are circulating the petition. I wanted to have a referendum. Part of the reason I wanted to have a referendum is that I know that comments that came in, I was on the moratorium committee, we reviewed all of the communication from the town to the town board, and comments in favor of preserving shadow pines ran 40-1 in favor. So I believe if we have time for a referendum, we will win. I'm just concerned, based on what we've talked about here, that people who are being asked to sign the petition don't have the full story, which is that if the town doesn't buy this, we have high confidence that there are going to be 255 homes, that will lead to, in fact, a larger tax increase due to school taxes, and that Dolomite has so far refused to extend the deadline, and if they don't do that, this petition will not result in a vote, but will kill the deal. So that was the point of those questions, and thank you for that. I have a few more questions. Looking at your timeline, is it true that Dolomite failed to respond to the town for 3 months from June to September of 2017?
Yes.
Okay. And that just 1 week after you finally got a binding letter, and maybe I'm using the wrong term, but September 20th or thereabouts, you got some kind of official response after a 3-month gap from Dolomite. Is it true that within a week or so after that, you were contacted by Ryan Holmes to review a proposal, and that in that conversation with Ryan Holmes, they indicated to you that they were under the understanding that you were going to fail to meet the deadline that had been imposed? Can you explain to me how Ryan Holmes would know that you were going to fail to meet the deadline?
It would be an assumption that they had some intelligence or knowledge that that might be the case.
So
That probably occurred during that 3-month period.
So it seems reasonable to conclude that Ryan Holmes was in active talks with Dolomite or Oldcastle during that time. Okay, so given that Dolomite failed to respond for 3 months and appears to have been talking to Ryan Holmes to sell the property, is it reasonable for residents to conclude that Dolomite was in fact not negotiating in good faith with the town?
I would like to believe that, we are continuing to negotiate in good faith, Sam.
I understand you are, but can you punch a hole in that logical argument, other than just saying you would hope that it's not true?
I would hope it's not true.
You hope it's not true, but it's a reasonable conclusion.
I think that a property owner can have good faith negotiations with more than one party. If you're selling your home, that can happen. So I would not want to make that statement as far as, and again, we continue to have good faith negotiations. Remember, the town can only purchase this property at this rate. We can't engage in a bidding war. Developers can, and developers can come in at a much higher figure than the town. We have had to be very careful with negotiations. It's sensitive work. I appreciate those who acknowledge that, and the hard work, the hours that have been put in, unbelievable hours put in on this.
And just as an aside, I think publishing this timeline was of tremendous value to the town, because there's been a lot of speculation on what was going on.
And Sam, I would agree with you. I think some of it's disconcerting that, when there's so much misinformation, speculation that's out there, I would encourage the petition passers to actually bring a copy of this timeline with them to share with residents sort of the time frame and the efforts that have gone into where we are today. Not standing at the door with the resident. I'm not sure what the conversation is, but again, this is part of, I think, the reasoning for the press conference earlier today was to lay the timeline out there. Let the residents have a better understanding of sort of the efforts that have gone into this. Within a week of extending the moratorium, that's when Dolomite came back and said, hey, we're interested in working with you, but you have to have all the cash right now. And it took 3 months to convince them that we need to have some form of financing vehicle. When they acquiesced to that, they said, okay, but here's your deadline. And that's sort of where we are.
Okay.
And I just hope that, the residents are informed of that when they're looking at the other options out there.
And I can appreciate and I concur with residents who say, I want my right to vote for this, and I would vote yes for the purchase of Shadow Pines. I would concur with that. My answer to you is you may not get that opportunity. You may not get that opportunity if this goes to that, if we have to seek that type of extension.
Okay. I have a few other questions to get to petition that I am considering to start. Is it true that Dolomite was paying only $80,000 per year in property taxes for that property? 80,000 plus or minus?
84.
It was about, I think Councilwoman Messo, I think it was between 82 and 84.
Okay, so a little over $80,000 a
Yes.
year. Is it also true that our property tax is around $35 per thousand, and a piece of property that's valued at $3.5 to $4.5 million, the property tax should be more like $100,000 to $140,000 a year? My point being that Dolomite has been paying significantly less in property taxes on that property than a fair market value, and less than what I pay on my home.
Sam, you would have to take that up with the assessor.
I'm getting to something. I'm setting up a series of points that Dolomite has been acting in bad faith and has gotten a good deal for decades, and now we are being asked to just take it. Next question. Are you aware that the town wanted to close the quarry in the late 60s, and the purchase of the surrounding land was to create a buffer between the quarry and residents? Okay, yes, you are. Are you aware that for the past 3 decades, the quarry has always and consistently filed a document informing the DEC that the surrounding land was and would continue to be a buffer between the quarry and the residents?
Yes, sir.
Absolutely.
Okay, and here's my point. Given that Dolomite is reneging on a long-standing agreement of many decades with the people of Penfield, and that they appear to me to be negotiating in bad faith, dragging out the clock, not responding for months at a time, and that they've had a significant tax break of many hundreds of thousands of dollars over the past 40 years, I think it would be reasonable to rezone the property. And this is my question. If enough residents sign a petition to rezone that property, as frankly, it should have been done 30 or 40 years ago, when that land was purchased and was intended to be a buffer, it should have been rezoned. This town gave Dolomite a break for 30 or 40 years, not rezoning, I think largely because we knew the Odenbach family, and there really was good faith with the Odenbach family. We're not dealing with the Odenbachs anymore. We're dealing with CRH in Dublin. But if enough residents sign a petition to rezone, would the town be required to hold a vote on rezoning?
So any petition that comes in, the town board takes a look at it. But just because the petition said that, we are demanding that you rezone, the town board does not have to have an obligation. I'm going to just make sure that I'm not practicing, my role as an attorney. But while you can certainly ask for it or demand it, the town doesn't necessarily have to do it. This board doesn't necessarily have to do it.
If we got signatures requesting a vote to rezone the property, would this board seriously consider it and explain why or why not you did not do it? You did or did not do it?
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you. I really appreciate this. To me, my conclusion, and I can't prove it, but looking at this timeline, it certainly appears to me that whether it's Dolomite or it's Oldcastle in Atlanta, the parent company, or it's their parent company in Dublin, it seems very likely to me that they have not been negotiating in good faith with you, that there is a pattern of them only coming to you when the moratorium's extended, okay, I guess we'll deal with you. Not going to talk to you for 3 months at a time, and at the same time they're talking to Ryan. I do not believe, based on this timeline, that Dolomite Oldcastle CRH has been negotiating in good faith. And I would encourage you to invite John Seal to come to a town meeting and explain, give him the opportunity. If he wants to make the argument that, in fact, Dolomite has been negotiating in good faith, give him the platform to come and tell us how this timeline could possibly be consistent with an organization that was actually trying to partner with the people of Penfield. Thank you.
Thank you, Sam. Jeff Burns.
Hi, my name's Jeff Burns. I'm one of the founders of the Save Shadow Pines group. And I want to correct the record on a few things that Neil Madden mentioned. One is that we are opposing anyone petitioning. We're not opposing anybody petitioning. We would have preferred a referendum ourselves. We're pretty confident that we would have won the referendum, that there's overwhelming support for this purchase of Shadow Pines. So that was a incorrect characterization. Also, I'd like Neil, I understand he's not familiar with Facebook, but there's a distinction between our posts and Save Shadow Pines and comments that people made. We've never said anything that's been disparaging of you or used those sort of words to describe you. So those were comments that were in Save Shadow Pines, not our posts. So I think that Sam gave a very strong argument for why we've been saying any signature on the petition is really a vote for development. But I think I would go further. Every signature on that petition is a vote for higher taxes and for more traffic. So if you want higher taxes, put your name on that petition. That's what you're going to get, higher taxes. I'll say something in defense of the town board, and that is that in May, Dolomite had requested and said that they needed a drop-dead date for the sale. And the town board responded, and they offered what was in effect a drop-dead date. They said that they would offer to hold a bond referendum on Election Day, November 7th, and if the vote is affirmative, to purchase the property 20 days later. That's what's in the timeline here. So the board did make an offer for a drop-dead date, what would have been an effective drop-dead date, and offered a reasonable time for a closing date. And there was not a response from Dolomite for a long time thereafter, even though the town board followed up with them on several occasions. So curiously, after not getting that response, Ryan Holmes is back in the picture, and they contact the town board per the timeline, and they start asking questions, and they say, hey, we'd like to show you a new plan for Shadow Pines, that we want to develop Shadow Pines. And the town board, by my reading of between the lines here of the timeline, seemed to be surprised about that. They weren't expecting to hear from Ryan Holmes right then. And Ryan Holmes goes further on this and says, we understand you're not going to be able to close this deal. Now, where did they get this information, as Sam brought this up? Obviously, there's something else going on here. And then they suggest that perhaps you should ask Oldcastle as to what's going on. So it doesn't seem like we've been getting a very straight deal here from Oldcastle as far as my reading between the lines here on the timeline. Now, I would refer to something that Sam mentioned, and that was the 1966 master plan. And there's a segment in here where the issue about the quarry has been known for a long time. And there were efforts to plan for it back more than 50 years ago. In the 1966 master plan, it says, and I quote, one further question concerning industrial land use in Penfield has to do with the stone quarry, blah, blah, blah. In past years, when this part of Penfield was sparsely settled, the quarry was not particularly objectionable. Recently, however, residential development has occurred in the vicinity of the quarry, and before long, will probably surround it on all sides. Under these circumstances, the blasting, crushing, trucking, and other operations associated with the quarry will become increasingly objectionable. It is therefore recommended that the quarry be discontinued within the approximate period covered by the master plan. It is at present a non-conforming use under the town zoning ordinance, and thus the town may be in a position to require its discontinuance, provided a reasonable period is allowed for its amortization. So this is more than 50 years ago that we were concerned about this in this town. So one question I have for the town board is, what is the time period typically covered by a master plan?
We, historically, we have updated our master plan, comprehensive plan, every 10 years.
Okay, so at this time, the master plan had expected that something would be done within 10 years and that we would approach Dolomite and tell them that it was a non-conforming use and it was within our rights to give them time to amortize, but that this should be shut down. It was not appropriate within a residential area as it had become. So another question I have then is...
So I think it's important, Jeff, so that, again, you know, we're dealing with facts, and I'd ask our attorney to, you know, because it is a pre-existing non-conforming use, there is some, you know, statute legislation regarding pre-existing non-conforming. And Mr. Horowitz?
A pre-existing non-conforming use is... I don't get that at home, but I apologize again. Sorry. In the law, pre-existing non-conforming use is a use that doesn't comply with the zoning as it is in the zoning ordinance, but the use was started before the zoning ordinance was put in place, and therefore legally is allowed to continue. That's a pre-existing non-conforming use.
So I guess my point, Jeff, is that you can't go in. They have some legislative rights. We just can't go in and just say, okay, effective 2020, you have to cease operation.
Now, this master plan said something that seems different from that. Is that statute or law changed from that period of time?
Well, if you're talking about an amortization period,
right,
that is something that can be considered.
So there is an opening there where
but it's not black and white.
Right.
And I gotta believe it would be very vigorously examined, not only by the town's people, but also Dolomite.
Right.
And especially in consideration that what I'm hearing is they have about 35 years of product to finish off the site.
Yeah.
So let me put it in that context.
Now, when you look at an aerial map there, they're pretty close to the road, so it's surprising that they would have 35 years of product. Perhaps they go deeper and deeper and deeper, but they've gone about as close to the edge as it looks like it's possible. But I would say, though, that if the golf course that was put there was not a buffer, why didn't they mine it?
Excuse me.
If they obviously had that as a buffer, or they were a mining company, they were doing a quarry, so they had that there as a buffer. Otherwise, they would have put in a mine there. That would have been the business thing. They knew that there was a problem in having a quarry in a residential area, and so they bought that land as a buffer. And they did the same thing with Shadow Lake. So. I would just say that I am hoping that Dolomite Old Castle is paying attention to this as well, and I would guarantee them that their industrial use in a residential area will be scrutinized far greater than it ever has been before by the residents of this town if they cannot see their way to maintain that buffer that they've said was needed all along. So thank you for your time.
Thank you, Jeff. Yes, sir. And then Bob, yes, sir. Welcome.
Thank you. My name's Jeff Bales, 1816 Baird Road. I can't wait to tell my wife that Desperate Housewives has nothing on Penfield Town Hall meetings.
It's a reality
So
show.
I'll try and keep it Brief. Honestly, when Neil was initially talking, it's one of the reasons I came here is that I have actually, as much as a young father of 3, you know, career, everything going on, can be in touch with everything that's going on. I am familiar with the moratorium committee's work. I'm familiar with the process and the meeting that went on to initiate the moratorium 2 years ago, and have been trying to stay up to date. But I also was caught off guard by the fact that suddenly we were going to be purchasing the land. I'm not against that. Mr. Quinn mentioned earlier that the town was advocating for purchasing the land. I think I heard a couple people object, and I would agree with that, that I think the town said we don't want housing there. We're not necessarily saying we want to buy it, but we know that we don't want 255 homes. And the issue that's near and dear to my heart is pretty much what Sam spoke to, which is what that'll mean for the expansion with the school system and the inability for the infrastructure to maintain that, and what it'll mean for our future taxes. So I do agree and appreciate Sam, you know, cheers to you. I think he very well articulated a lot of the points that originally why we wanted to have the moratorium in the first place. So my question is something that I'm not clear on is 2 years ago when we talked about doing the moratorium, the issue of rezoning came up. And I believe at the time the concern was that the extensive potential legal battle that could ensue if the town tried to rezone would be cost prohibitive versus trying to put on a moratorium, come up with alternative proposals and solutions. Is that accurate?
I think the recommendation of the moratorium committee was to consider purchasing the land, and the idea of considering a different type of zoning for the property is a process that could be and is being done concurrently with the proposed acquisition. So the underlying zoning is half-acre zoning, and the moratorium was put in place to give the town an opportunity to determine, starting with the moratorium committee, what uses would be appropriate for the land in Shadow Pines, and depending on the wisdom of the committee and the board would come up perhaps with a different type of underlying zoning for that property, which would be very important if it stayed in private ownership. But if the town were able to buy it, it becomes less of an issue. But it is still an important issue today because there's no guarantee, obviously, that the town will be successful in acquiring the property. So that process is continuing regarding the underlying zoning and what it should be.
And I will add that really in any deliberation we have, but in this context as well, we think of the town's legal position in kind of twofold. One is we certainly want to follow the law, follow regulations, the timelines. You know, a municipality, we have many more restraints than private buyers do. That's the first prong. The other prong is limiting the town's exposure to future legal liability. And that was one of the reasons why the moratorium was so important, is that you can't just establish a moratorium and not show that you are taking steps during that moratorium to decide something, to move forward in one way or the other. You can't just have this open-ended moratorium. You expose your town to a lawsuit in that regard. The extension of a moratorium is even a little more risky because you've got to still show you're taking those steps through additional planning. So that, to Mr. Horowitz's point, that demonstrates that potential for rezoning, we have more legs to stand on if we show we've gone through a process to lead to a logical conclusion versus just an arbitrary decision.
Thank you. That answers my other question. And so I guess because Sam already mentioned if there were a petition to look at rezoning, I understand that if the town purchased the land, you could look at rezoning as part of that purchase. But I guess it goes back to what Sam's point was about starting up a petition, is how realistic is the town's ability to rezone that land if we are unable to purchase it. Because my recollection from 2 years ago, when the moratorium started, was that that wasn't really an option.
Let me say to that, the town board has the discretion to enact legislation, to amend zoning ordinances as circumstances and conditions change regarding a piece of property. So it is not an impossible legal matter at all to do an appropriate rezoning of the property. What the town, and what you refer to in terms of potential litigation and substantial expense to the town is the town cannot legally take all the use value out of a piece of property, zone it in such a way that the property owner can get a reasonable economic return. That doesn't mean the highest and best return, but just some reasonable return. And when we rezone it, we will try to rezone it in a way that it serves what the community needs and provides the property owner a reasonable return on his investment.
Yeah, that's what I recall. Okay.
Yes.
Thank you. I appreciate what you guys do. I know sometimes people just come here and complain when they're not happy with something. I recognize, I myself, I wish more in my age group would get involved. I appreciate what you guys do. I appreciate everybody else that does come here on everybody else's behalf. I too want the right to vote. Wish we had it. Again, I just don't want to see another 255 Ryan homes go up. I'm already tired of the 30 that are on the corner of 5 Mile and Atlantic. And as far as I can tell, 9 years in Penfield, my wife's been here for 30, but Dolomite seems like a stain on the community to me. So that's just where I stand.
One of the things that I just wanted to comment while I thought of it, when you said it about the right to vote, we had offered to hold a public referendum on November 7th, Election Day. Would have been a great time to do it, perfect time to do it. In order to have that vote on November 7th legally, we would have had to set that vote on September 7th, 60 days before. That's the town board passes a resolution and establishes a voting date. The minimum time is 60 days. We did not get an indication from Dolomite until September 20th that they were even willing to consider a financial contingency.
I'm sorry to interrupt. I didn't mean to rehash that discussion. I understand the reasons behind it, why we did it.
I just wanted to clarify that because I think Mr. Madden had raised that as a question.
Yeah, okay, all right.
So
I understand the reasons
It helps
why
if I
and why
hear
we are
things
where
more than once sometimes, so.
Yeah, sure. I understand now the reasons why we are where we are, so I appreciate all the information, and that's exactly why I came. So thank you.
Thanks, Jeff.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, Mr. Maxwell. Oh, I'm sorry. I did. So I'm going to ask you, just sit right there, Bob Peterson. Yes, so thank you for, I didn't forget you totally or intentionally. I apologize. So, and then we'll get to Mr. Maxwell. Thank you. Thank you, Bob.
Bob Peterson, 1931 Clerk, and thank you. I was a member of the moratorium committee, and we spent many, many hours hashing this out. Most of us were on the side of the town purchasing it for open space. There were a couple that would rather see it developed, certainly a minority of the group. But all of the group intended and expected that there would be a public referendum should it go up for purchase, and that was the intent. We expected that. My question is, I think Neil is doing a very good job of getting signatures for his petition, as most likely he's going to make the required amount. And assuming he gets the petition together by December 20th, you would be able to hold the required referendum on what date is that?
It would be
Earliest?
60, it would be 60 days.
60 days,
We need a
okay.
minimum of 60 days. So if it was submitted on the 20th of December, we would have to call for a vote.
There would have to be a subsequent meeting. After that, we have to review the petitions, and there would be a meeting after that, and then after that meeting, a referendum would be called for at a minimum of 60 days, 60 to 75.
Minimum of 60, most likely 90 at best. No?
It can't be 90.
Can't be 90,
When we talk
okay.
about days, those are legal requirements under New York state law. Those aren't just how much it would take us to do something. Those are
Okay.
hard deadlines.
The point I want to get to, though, is in order to hold that referendum and make it a sensible or reasonable thing, the residents would need to know what they're voting on. There has to be a story told about the town's intended use of the property. I mean, we know some of what the intended use might be, but it would have to be clarified and communicated. That's going to take quite an effort. I know that, I'm not sure of the date, but somewhere around the year 2000, the town put up for vote a $10 million bond issue to buy the property rights to quite a few parcels of farmland to protect it. And as part of that, it was an extensive effort to get the communication out. There were brochures, there were videos made. That's going to take time. Are you able to do that in the 60 days to get the story out?
That would fall on us to do that, Bob. I mean, it would, again...
Because my concern is the story that's being told by the petitioners going around door to door is not the full story. I have a friend that lives in Allen's Creek subdivision across from Gentles. He was petitioned recently, and the petitioner, as part of trying to get his signature, said, well, you know, it's going to increase your taxes $14 a year. And he didn't say the other part, that if you live in the Penfield School District, it's going to, if the 255 homes go in, it's likely to increase your taxes by, my calculation, $48 a year.
In addition to infrastructure
That
costs.
story was not told. My friend was smart enough to understand the implications of what it would do to the schools. He did not sign the petition. But I'm afraid that Neil is going to gather a lot of signatures under a misrepresentation, and it might put the validity of the petition somewhat in doubt, in my view. I don't know. But I do ask him to educate or inform his petitioners to clarify that, either not use that statement that it's going to increase your taxes $14 a year, or give the whole story. I hope he would do that. I think we should get to a referendum because I believe we all want it. I think if the story is told fully and clearly, the referendum to buy the Shadow Pines and keep it as open space will succeed. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. Now, the next Bob, Mr. Maxwell. Thank you for your patience.
Hey, I'm Bob Maxwell, 1462 Plank Road. And I want to say I agree with Bob and Sam for doing his homework. My school taxes are high now. I don't need them any higher. My questions to you is, you buy the golf course, what's the plan with the open space? Who pays for the upkeep and how much? Do you have a figure on that? When is taxes going to go up for the upkeep?
So certainly depending upon what goes on that, Bob, so it's not just an easy answer to say it's going to cost an extra $1 or $3 or whatever the case is. The moratorium committee, came back and recommended a combination of open space, recreational park, pavilions, soccer fields and things like that. So again, what the town has historically done in the past, and I'll use Rothfuss Park as an example. Rothfuss Park, the town purchased Rothfuss Park, and then over the last 12 years have done things, to build out that park. And then those dollars to maintain, whether it's cutting grass or if you're putting a building on, those all come out of, obviously, tax dollars. So again, depending upon what it is, you know, will have a bearing on how much that cost is.
But you don't think about that now?
Well, absolutely.
With the plans that you have, and if you do win, have you thought about the future?
Well, I think this board has thought about this, you know, the future. I mean, short term, you probably will not see a lot of activity, you know, on that property. So when I say short term, over the next, you know, few years, 2 to 3 years, you probably will not. You'll see some what I would call bare minimum, cutting the grass around the Clerk house, you know, and some things that essentially we've seen here over the last couple of seasons.
Now, you have stated that if you do get the golf course, that you want to keep so many acres for the rec center and the library and the highway department, maybe?
Yep, absolutely. I think one of the things that we've talked about, this board has talked about, is you know, general municipal use. You know, the town continues to grow. Our community center sits, the parking lot and the building, that's the only land that we have. All the rest of the land around it is the school district's land. And so
that'll cost the town a lot of money too, for water and sewer and parking lots.
Absolutely.
And you considered all that into your phasing?
Well, you'd have to, again, you'd have to then put a plan together and go through. You'd have to either budget for it or, as towns have done in the past, school districts have done in the past, you will have a referendum to build out a building, a library, community center, something like that.
So then you really...
I would just say that, you know, there's a the short-term and the long-term vision.
Right.
I mean, the short-term is purchasing the property, having it in the town's holdings. And as the supervisor mentioned, 2 to 3 years, probably not much activity on that site. We're hopefully, when this process is complete, about to embark on a master plan, our next 10-year, we discussed it earlier, but about to start our next 10-year master planning process. I think using the moratorium committee's recommendations as a foundation, you know, we would go through the process of having a master plan committee. They would do their due diligence over a 12 to 18-month period and sort of then look at now the land in town holdings to determine the best use and most appropriate use over the next 10 years. And that would be for the residents and the board at that time to make the best decisions they have.
So you would vote on all those updates?
Yes.
Yes.
Because
Buildings,
in that
parking
case, the town is 100% in control of that process.
Correct.
And then there would be a vote.
But don't put the cart before the horse.
Right.
I don't want to talk about what infrastructure or
Well, there's
facilities are going to be
always-
on that site until we have the ability to, again, purchase the land, assess the land, and formulate those necessary citizen committees to begin the master planning process and sort of then determine maybe the direction.
You don't just buy land for nothing. You got to have a plan.
I think my comment on this is, you know, what do we envision, you know, seeing there? I'm commenting on what we don't want to see there.
Right.
That's the short term. This is a preventive approach. And it's an investment. I've gone on record saying we need to invest in our future. It goes beyond your tax bill for next year. And I'm certainly mindful. I'm a taxpayer myself. I have kids, we're certainly mindful of that. Our most important vote every year is our budget. So that certainly is very important. But some big investments for the future and for a quality of life in our town, it's an investment, and I'm certainly prepared to embark on that with considerable resident input as to what we can do to make that parcel, if we are able to acquire it, benefit the most number of residents and community of different abilities, different ages, different interests. I think it's a remarkable opportunity.
So I guess I got one more question. we're in the process of putting up solar grids. Would it be feasible to put them over there if you got it?
You know, certainly, you know, we would look at everything. I mean, you know, and that would be something the board would have to look at and weigh as part of that. I mean, solar has certainly gotten to be, you know, a big thing. But I don't see that property as being a solar farm. So if, you know, I want to go on record to say that, you know, solar to help support activities there might be one thing, but I don't see 50, 60, 100 acres being set up as a solar farm.
But I think there certainly will be considerable conversation, as we do, you know, every year we talk about, you know, revenue for the town. And there are, you know, recreational activities that provide revenue, and entertainment activities that provide revenue to the town. Lodges, for example. You know, our lodges sell out very quickly. That's an opportunity for some revenue. I think that would be part of the conversation. We would, to say that we have a plan as to what is going to be done with every acre, no, because that's not going to be our decision alone. We need community input for that.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks, Bob. Yes, please. You dropped some papers.
That's your timeline, I just put them down.
Oh, got it. Oh, okay. Terrific.
I don't have that many notes. I'm Carol Samuel, and I live at 27 Huntington Meadow, quite a neighbor to Shadow Pines. And I really want to thank the gentleman who represented Shadow Pines. These men are so articulate, they are so industrious in looking at so much history and so much detail. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And I know I've said it before. I probably don't have a question for you, but just give me a couple of minutes, because we're not talking about not in my backyard, because that would mean me. But we're talking about all of Penfield. And just the other day, there was an accident right in the village. You could hardly get out onto Panorama Trail with the cars. And well, usually you can wait for the red light to change, but the stream of cars was constant. People who live far out in the east part of Penfield, you're going to be affected by this too. You already have trouble coming in Atlantic. Just wait. Okay, it's sad to think about what would happen with all those homes. And they are a lot of deer out there, and they are very, very happy right now. They're just having such a good time playing. I worry that Dolomite doesn't get it from the citizens how much we really, really want this. In 2016, this room was full and overflowing, and they got it. They understood that, yes, the citizens of Penfield really want to have Shadow Pines undeveloped and in the hands of the town. I don't know how we can show that fervor again, really. I know all this, and I appreciate all that you've been talking about of all these dates that are involved. But I just don't know how we can show that to Dolomite, that we're really serious, and please, just be a little softer, because it's your town too. There were so many things said in 2016 at the meetings, and I went to a couple of the moratorium committees, and no, there was not any citizen input at those meetings. We were not allowed to talk. We had to just listen. Talking about to get a vote, Mr. Madden, you know, I've forgotten which president it was that said he didn't know why someone didn't vote for him. Well, that was because no one asked him. And you're out there asking. I wish we'd all thought you were going to be doing that. We could have been out there asking on our side for Shadow Pines, because we're pretty sure you're going to win with this idea of getting a referendum, which is logical, but timing is really kind of crappy. That's right. I would like to say to you, cease and desist. I don't know. It's really, really serious. It's putting a damper on the holiday season, really. So.
Thank you, Carol. Thank you, Carol. Steve Ward.
My name is Steve Ward. I live at 74 Corral Drive. I actually just came here tonight to support Neil and his decision to spend his holiday time this time of year to go door to door so that the citizens of Penfield would have the right to vote on a $3 million purchase for something that we don't even know what we're going to spend the $3 million on. We have spent 2 years trying to decide specifically what's going to be done with the property, and at this point in time, we don't really know. And I feel, I don't want to say one way or another whether it is the right thing to do or the wrong thing to do, but I think the citizens of Penfield should have the right to say that. I know that Councilman Moore says he really supports having a referendum. And I have to say that I was offended by Councilman Quinn when he said the majority of the people of Penfield support this, when he does not have any documentation or anything other than a bunch of fairly vocal citizens that live within a mile of Shadow Pines that have been very, very well organized in supporting this. Once again, I don't know whether it is the right thing. I don't know whether it is the wrong thing, but I do know that the right thing is for the citizens of Penfield to be able to at least voice what they would like to have. And I think that if a deal can be done and it is voted in favor of it, then that is the right thing. Another thing I've been somewhat offended with tonight is the bad-mouthing that has been done of Dolomite. Now, Dolomite is a business. Yeah, when people look at businesses, they think it's a bunch of people, and yes, they're run by people overseas and everything like that. But they are a business that this town has been jerking around for 2 years, saying you can't do anything with your property. And they had a business that was failing. And if it wasn't failing, they would have continued operating it as a golf course during those 2 years. But a golf course can't make it. Just like in Webster, the Webster Golf Club couldn't make it, so they're closing down. A bunch of citizens opposed it because they didn't want development near their homes. It's been a real messy mess in Webster. However, the decision was made that the town is not going to spend money to buy a golf course that they don't know what they're going to be doing with it. If you've got $3.2 million, you can get land around town much more cheaply to build a community center or expand the library or whatever you want to do. You don't need that particular land that is more expensive. Another thing that I have a problem with, and I don't know enough about the numbers, but saying that the Penfield School District is going to have such hardships with this, it's essentially saying we should cut off all development in Penfield then. If development causes the school district to not be able to operate without increasing their budget and increasing taxes, then we should have no more development whatsoever in Penfield. You might as well get rid of your planning board, because you're essentially saying that we can't build anything here because we're going to harm our school district. And I find this in some ways contradictory, because our supervisor last year, at the time the tax bills came out, made the statement that the reason that our tax bills were staying low in the town of Penfield was because of the development that we had had and that more taxes were coming in. Now we're saying we don't want more development and we don't want more taxes coming in. Once again, I don't understand the numbers, but it does make me question how one time we can be talking out one side of our mouth and another time we're talking out of another side of our mouth. And I just feel that there is so much uncertainty here that the right thing to do is to listen to the citizens of Penfield. And I feel the citizens of Penfield deserve the right to have a referendum on this. And that is definitely the right thing to do. And thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Steve. Anyone else? Yes, Jim Froome.
I'm Jim Froome. I live at 11 Denonville, and I lived on Harwood Circle on the fifth hole at the Pines for pretty close to 30 years. Quick question, just a little bit of clarity, because I think I know the answer, but are you negotiating with Dolomite or with Old Castle?
So the easy way to answer that is that Old Castle purchased Dolomite, and they purchased the name. And so the parent company is Old Castle, and so that is who ultimately the town is dealing with.
Okay, and just for a point of clarification, I'm not an insider, but I can tell you that 25 months ago, I was playing golf at Shadow Lake, and then later at Greystone, and Shadow Pines had been closed down, I believe, the week earlier, and the talk in the clubhouses by Dolomite employees was that Shadow Pines was done and that the Pines and Greystone would be put up for sale. All three of them would be put up for sale, but just two as a golf course. And I can tell you that we tried to get a group together to buy the Pines, and we were pushed back against every way because they felt that they would get their $4 to $5 million as property. That was how it was marketed. That was told to me probably 6 weeks before anybody knew what was going on around here when they were doing their evaluations, okay? In terms of, and you know, I got so much to say I could probably make Neil look like he didn't speak very long, but I'm just going to jump around. I just don't have any train of thought right now because there's so much been said. But in terms of I was on the committee, and in terms of what to do with it, there was a plan. The majority of people said, we want open space, and if you can't afford something to do with it right away, let's just leave it passive. Let's have some very simple structures there, some paths, some hiking paths. The back 9 is up and down. It's a beautiful place to walk. And then we'll figure it out from there. There were a lot of ideas, but that was the #1 choice of everybody. And in terms of, I'll ask you this question. You guys have been running the town for what, 10 years or so or more? Have you ever had an issue this big?
I'm sorry, Jim?
You've been running the town for a while?
8 years.
8 years, okay. Have you ever had an issue this big or this many people in here? As we did at the moratorium votes?
I have not seen that in the 8 years that I've been here, no.
I will say if we have had one that has been as much of a draw, in my opinion, it has not been as important as this is.
Okay. And I think we can all agree, and again, I think Sam and Jeff did a pretty good job of kind of running through the history of a lot of this stuff. And I would like to remind everybody, and especially those who want to bring in the Webster Golf Course and Penfield Golf Course, this is not about a golf course. This is flat about a buffer around a quarry that probably shouldn't be here, but it is here. I mean, it's the town, when it started in 1928, there was no people there. And in 1966, I don't remember the number, so I'm not going to quote them, but the town had grown significantly from 1928 to 1966 when that first master plan came out, and that was done by Monroe County. And then every year since then, roughly every 10 years.
Roughly every 10 years.
Yeah, we've had one. And to the best of my knowledge, in pretty much every one of those comprehensive plans, the space to the south, the west, and the east of the quarry has been some sort of recreation open land. I think one time there was maybe a school, maybe get there, something from the school was going to be there in one of them. But for the most part, so this is not an issue about a golf course and people being mad. And personally, it's not even an issue about too much traffic. Yeah, that's going to be a byproduct of it. But this is an issue about when, if anybody wants to go back and look at the documents, and they're hard to find, but when the town put the moratorium up, they gave the committee a list of documents to look at. And there was a big part of it about quality of life in Penfield. Okay. I got a document the other day, and we don't know if this is correct. I haven't, fact-checked this, if you will, but somebody did, I think it was 5 or 10 years ago, somebody went through all the parkland we have, and I believe on an acreage basis, and you can tell me if you think this is realistic, they thought it was about 1.5%, 6, 8, 10 years ago, which isn't a lot. In terms of financing all this, what nobody wants to talk about is, okay, I've heard 11 and I've heard $14. Would you comment which is closer?
$11.
$11,
And
okay.
that, again, so let's put it in context. That is the average home at $190,000 in Penfield, based on what is being proposed with the referendum, with the bond, it would average $11 per year.
Okay.
Additional above and beyond what they currently pay today.
And the year 2000 open space referendum you did where you bought development rights,
2002, I believe it was.
Pardon?
2002.
2002, I'm sorry. If I remember the numbers right, a good majority of the properties were out this part of town, on the east side of town, that you paid less per acre for, right? And on the west side of town, where property is, there's more population, if I remember right, 2 of the properties you paid $14,000 and $20,000 per acre, and that was 17 years ago. Okay, so in terms of what we're paying per acre for this, it's not that big a deal, in my opinion. Okay, and Tony, you can. We talked about this one time before, but if I remember right, when we were talking about how did this happen during the moratorium meetings, the term "kick the can down the road." We're not the only board that didn't rezone this for properties, even though it's been in the comprehensive plans all these years.
Right.
Okay, and so now is the time to do something about it. I want to vote also, just so you know. Okay, I believe your timetable because I have actually spoken with the person that I think you're speaking to down in Atlanta, and he's good and he's sharp, and I think it's the numbers we've heard where there's another $1.5 million on the table is probably pretty accurate. I was told that earlier on, and I have no reason to disbelieve that. So, and then the last thing I'll just go to is for anybody that's really worried about the $11 or $14 a year plus a few dollars to mow the lawn. The commitment to this town, and I commend you guys for this and previous boards, going back all the way to Irene Gossin. The commitment to open space for quality of life has been in this town for a long, long time. And the 2002 bond, and I'm going to guess on this, is going to be done in 2 or 3 or 4 years. Okay? And the original bond, in 2002, the brochure I just saw the other day, I believe they said $44 or $45 on an average home, which back then I think was 150 or 60 or something like that.
I think that's right.
For 20 years. Okay, so if you look at it that way, if this is a continuation of our open space initiative or trying to keep quality life in this town, so we pay $11 for 2 or 3 or 4 years, and then whatever you're paying on the bond now, we're done. And then after we buy it, some of that extra money you should probably come up and spend some more money on some more open space somewhere. Or if the town wants you to develop into more of a parkland that costs some money, there's the money right there. Our taxes shouldn't have to go up, because if you don't do anything with the money right now, the taxes go down when the bond is done, theoretically. I mean, we know that
It's like a
doesn't
first
happen.
mortgage and a second mortgage
Yeah.
I've explained to people as far
Yeah,
as the
yeah.
financing.
But basically, one payment goes away. I mean, it's cash flow. It's pretty simple. So I'm sure I'd have more to say, but thank you for hearing me. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Jim. Other first-time speakers? Yes, ma'am.
Hi, my name is Chandra Petrie. I live at 181 Sawmill Drive. I have a question, and it's in relationship to the timeline, at the end of the timeline. And we've heard a lot of information about moratoriums and that type of thing. My question is, what if we go past the deadline and approach the moratorium end? What are the next steps? Would another moratorium be an option, or is that just opening up liabilities?
It's certainly an option. Mr. Horowitz, you may want to speak to that. It's not an option that, you know, is preferable. Of course,
Good, yeah.
we'd like to see this come to fruition, to have the deadline extended and a public referendum be had.
Right.
I think we've had some minor discussions as to you know, staring down the face of that deadline of the moratorium. Extending the moratorium is an option, but as I referenced earlier, you know, you do it the third time, you know, we've got to start showing that we're not stalling, or that we're not trying to prevent the property owner from getting a decent return on their property. So I don't think that would be the ideal situation. We've talked about what this entire board, I can speak for, the ideal situation is we have intended all along has been a public referendum, and we will still work very hard to get to that point. We just had to keep driving the bus to not miss the deadlines altogether.
And under the moratorium, what kind of limitations does Old Castle have during that time frame? Can they actually sell the property
Yes.
during that time frame?
Old Castle's been able to sell the land since...
All along?
All along.
Okay.
And it appears that there have been other prospective buyers willing to negotiate even with the moratorium in place. We're certainly mindful of that. But from the town's perspective, correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Horowitz, the moratorium, as we put it forth, we would not even accept an application for development on the parcel with a moratorium in place. And even given that, there was still, obviously, as we're seeing from the timeline, activity from other prospective buyers.
Okay. Those were the main questions I had, but it kind of, and some of the gentlemen brought it up earlier, that I don't feel sorry for Old Castle. They made a choice to close the property, and, you know, I guess no one is really privy to whether they were actually losing money on the scenario or not, but I don't feel sorry for them. My support is fully behind the residents here, and hopefully keeping it an open space that's not going to contribute to overcrowding of schools or overtaxing of our residents. So, but thank you for all your help.
Thanks for coming.
Thank you. Thank you for coming. Sam, I'm going to check, just make sure we have, yes, one first-time speakers, then we'll get into the second-time speakers.
Sorry we don't have coffee for everybody tonight.
Good evening. I'm Sean McCardle. I live at 15 Hillside Road. I'd like to thank the town for the opportunity to speak tonight. I'm fairly informed on this process, like one of the previous speakers. I'm kind of coming up to speed. I appreciate all the information that's been provided tonight. It's been very informative. The thing that I'm curious to understand from the board, I think what I have heard, and please correct me if I'm wrong, that collectively the board seems to be in opposition to the potential of 255 Ryan homes or something of that nature. Am I correct in my understanding of that? So if that's the case, what I guess what I'm hung up on, or what I'm curious about, is it sounds like rezoning has always been maybe a possible option, but why wasn't that explored 2 years ago when this first came forward? Mr. Horowitz, you mentioned that the rezoning concern is to make sure that the property maintains some sort of reasonable resale value, and I'm assuming that that $3.65 million is potentially a reasonable amount of money for them to get for the property. I'm wondering why that rezoning process didn't take place 2 years ago, so that maybe we could have forced that rezoning to prevent that type of development, and then the town could be in a better position to leverage that purchase. Is that something you can speak to?
Sure, absolutely. So the town certainly has been having conversations, our town attorney and staff have been having conversations about the rezoning of that piece of property. So that is another component to this whole dialogue as well, is that aspect.
Okay, thank you. That was all I was
Yeah,
wondering.
absolutely.
Appreciate it.
Thank you. Thanks, Sean. Other first-time speakers? Yes, ma'am. Mrs. Madden?
My name is Dorothy Madden. I am the wife of Neil Madden, and I'm very proud of it. I live at 10 Park Place,
should be.
Rochester, New York, 14625. I would like all of you in this room to picture me wearing Susan B. Anthony's black dress. I'm halfway there. I'm black and white. She fought for the women's right to vote. Men already had it. I invite each person in this room to stand if you do not believe in your right to vote. I see no one standing. I invite each person in this room to prove they believe in their right to vote by signing this petition. That is all we ask when we knock on people's door. I welcome any of you who wish to prove that you believe in your right to vote to meet me in the back of the room.
Dorothy, they can meet you outside of the room because we still do have a meeting to run and resolutions to act on. So if you have an interest to have folks sign, you can do it out in the hallway. Thank you. First-time speakers. Okay, second-time speakers, Sam?
Just wanted to make a few brief comments in response to some of the other things that have been said tonight. First comment I'd like to make is that over this 2-year process, there have been many people who have spoken on this that do not live within 1 mile of Shadow Pines. In fact, the moratorium committee had several members of the moratorium committee who lived much farther than 1 mile from Shadow Pines. In fact, I would hazard to say that the majority lived more than 1 mile from Shadow Pines, but I could be wrong on that. Just to point out the fact that there have been many opportunities for people to speak. Hundreds of people have made comments on this, most of whom don't live within 1 mile of Shadow Pines. And 40-1, the comments ran in favor. So there have been many opportunities to speak. And I understand that people are just becoming aware of this now. I would encourage them to take the time to actually learn what has transpired over the last 2 years, to actually get the information before they go off making decisions and reaching conclusions that the information doesn't warrant. Regarding the discussion of the school district, I believe that this property should be preserved, not for financial reasons. You might not realize that when I come and speak at these meetings. I talk about the finances because that's my expertise. For the past 15 years, I have done financial planning and financial forecasting for healthcare institutions. I know how that works, and so that's why I focus so much on the financial piece. People just need to understand that I have 3 kids. I would have liked to have had more kids. I have nothing against children. I have nothing against children being in Penfield. But somehow New York State has gotten itself to a point where school districts spend almost $25,000 per child to teach them that 2 + 2 = 4. That's where we are, whether we like it or not. And Penfield averages 1.2 children per house. So that means on average, the school district is spending almost $28,000 per year per house. That's a fact. And every time a house is built, unless it's in the range of $600,000 or more, the rest of the residents in this school district pick up the tab in part for the kids who end up living in that house. We just have to recognize that that's where we are. And for the people who want to make this decision based on finances, they need to recognize that the financial argument is in favor of preservation. The financial argument is against allowing Ryan Homes to build these houses. But that's not the primary reason to do this, and other folks have talked very eloquently on why we should. But people just need to recognize that this is the truth, this is fact, and we can't get away from it. And one last comment. Prior purchase of open space, Jim Froome talked about this a little bit. Which were the parcels that were purchased under the last open space that are closest to the Shadow Pines area?
Linda was on the open space. Gentles.
So Gentles.
The property.
So the one that's right behind Park Place where the Maddens live.
Okay. And then Creek Street, it was the old Filkins property.
So those properties, do we know what the price was? And many of the properties that were purchased, the properties weren't actually purchased, were they? It was just development rights.
Those 2 are development rights.
So those two properties were purchased for development rights, which would typically bring a price somewhat lower than an actual purchase. Is that correct?
Yes.
So, and those purchases were in the range of $20,000 per acre?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I'd
So
have to go back and check that record.
the point being that we're talking about 200 acres at $3.3 million, which works out to less than $17,000 per acre.
To purchase the
actually
land.
purchase and own the land and
Correct.
do something constructive with it for the community.
Correct.
Whereas the most comparable properties that have been purchased for open space weren't actually purchased, they were for development rights at a price significantly higher. My point being, it is very unlikely that the town would be able to buy other property around Penfield for municipal use that's situated such as this property is for a cheaper price than what we're talking about right now. Is that correct?
Yeah.
I think
It's
that's
a good general statement, I'd say, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. So just, I've got a couple of, if you would, Neil, I've got a couple of first-timers?
Yeah.
There's one first-timer there, okay. And could you, I know who you are, but could you tell us your name, please?
I'm Abigail Ogie, and I live on 1924 Clark Road.
Thank you, Abby.
If we don't purchase it, what would happen to the Clark house?
So if the town does not purchase and someone else purchased the property, I'm not sure I can totally answer your question. I know that the house, Clark House, is set up for a restaurant, so that might be one of the possible options for that. But whoever bought it would have to do something within the zoning for that, Abigail. I can't, I'm not sure I can give you much more detail than that. It is a local designated historic piece of property and building, and so there are some guidelines around that aspect of it as well.
Okay, that's the only question. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for coming in. No, Jeff, I've got Neil and then Jeff.
Yes, I'll be brief. I think we're all tired. I guess a couple of things. Again, all our group is asking for, and we're circulating these petitions just to say, do you want the right to vote? We are not proselytizing pro or con. We've made that very clear to the people who are out there. And so much of what we've heard tonight would be the campaign, you know, why you should vote yes. A lot of good reasons, put it out there. We're just at the basic level of asking people if they want that right to vote or not. I can report back, I will report back to the board meeting next week how we're doing. I think we're going to get more than enough votes. And I can't stop because I've put it out there to the public that, you know, if you want a referendum and everybody says that would be great, we'd have a referendum, that's the only way we can get one. And I don't disagree. I think it's clear that Oldcastle is not negotiating and is not being reasonable. And I don't have a problem, although I'm pretty conservative generally, I don't have a problem with the board dealing with that by, A, having an additional moratorium period, B, considering reasonable change of zoning. I don't even have a problem with the town, and again, this is a little tough for me to get there. This is just me personally. I don't have a problem with the town using eminent domain and buying the property. But of course, to buy the property, you need the money, which is the referendum. So I think, though, this whole discussion of, oh my goodness, and I understand people's anxiety that if somehow we are successful in circulating petitions to say we want the right to vote, that, you know, the town is without vehicles to prevent development, overdevelopment, not the right kind of development, not the right kind of developer on the site. I think you have things. But again, we're jumping ahead. All we're saying is give us a chance, give everybody a chance to vote, yes or no. That's all we're doing. We make it very clear to people who said they would take petitions around. We're not getting into an argument. It is not, we're for, against. We're just looking for the right to vote. So that is it. That's it in a nutshell. So I'll probably be back here at the next board meeting, your work session, probably be briefer, I hope, for all around, but we have to continue. My view is right to vote Penfield has got to continue with the effort it's undertaken. Otherwise, we're breaking faith.
I have a question for you, Neil.
Sure.
If the board had decided to not pursue negotiations any further and decided that we were just not, unilaterally decided we were not going to purchase the property, would you still be pursuing petitions for a referendum to purchase the property?
I guess if you hadn't gone forward with the November 20 resolutions, which is the, you know, to borrow the money and buy the land, well, I guess there's no need to have a referendum because you're not doing it. I mean, if you had just said, you know, you're being unreasonable, Dolomite, we're out of here, which I don't think was the thing to do. Did I understand your question? Or?
Well, I'm just saying, are we, you know, playing devil's advocate, are we on the flip side denying people the right to vote if we said, develop this parcel?
Well, I don't think that's the case. I mean, you know, I don't think it's automatically. You know, first of all, anybody's going to have to come in and make application, even if you didn't consider extending the moratorium, eminent domain, changing the zoning, all of which I think are things within the board's purview. You'd have all the usual process and usual processes of the town, you know, the town of planned progress. I mean, I think it's a well-developed planning system. But again, we're jumping ahead of ourselves. Let's have the people vote on this. And, you know, again, I don't want to go over the ground I've covered. I think the board could have been more forthright with the public that you felt you couldn't have a referendum on your own motion at an earlier date. But that's neither here nor there. We are where we are. We have to proceed or not. So we're proceeding with the petition.
Now, if you were to approach someone to get a signature and say they wanted to exercise their right to sign that, and they asked you if you were on the moratorium committee, I assume you'd give them information and if they had some questions to ask you?
No, because I don't approach anybody. I don't go out. My wife, Dorothy, says exactly what I've said. We're just passing this petition to see about the right to vote. We don't discuss that. And I just thought if I was out there discussing it, it's going to be a problem. I'm the carrier of the voter lists, basically.
Is it because
I drive the car, but I don't talk to voters.
Is it because you were the lone dissenter on the moratorium committee in that you submitted a written memo to the town board supporting residential development as it's currently zoned?
I was a dissenter. I don't make any secret of that.
I just thought maybe that'd be something that people would like to know if they were interested in being an informed signer.
You know, I have told people that, particularly in light of these rumors that I'm going to be financially rewarded as a result of this. I don't make no secret of this. I don't think that's relevant. You know, I know you're trying to paint me as some terrible guy. I think the points.
How have I done that?
Well, by saying, you know, I was on the moratorium committee, which, by the way, didn't go on for a year. That was, you know,
No, I just think that people are entitled to hear all sides and make an informed decision. I've learned from my time on the board that, you know, not to just give a question and ask for yes or no, but try to inform people as much as possible. I thought as a member of the moratorium committee, you'd be able to give people a lot of objective information. I put out there that you put a lot of time into, I'm sure, your opinion that you are entitled to, and you sat on the committee, and other people agree with you, and we appreciate everybody's input from the committee.
Thank you.
So by no means is that disparaging, but I think we talk about transparency and open information, and you have a wealth of information from sitting on that committee, and I find it curious that you are simply just walking around with the petitions when you've got a lot of information to provide people.
No, I don't think it is, because again, we're back to the very basics. Let's have a vote. I think it would be improper for me to be sharing my information. I think it's improper for me to share the majority opinion, because again, if there is enough people who want a referendum, we're going to have the pros and cons, you know, which side makes the most sense. And, you know, if I was a betting person, I think the yeses will carry it. So again, this is not an effort to hornswoggle anybody into a different point of view. It's just, let's have the vote, because that's what we should have.
We all hope, we all
I know we all hope
say
it.
that.
We all hope it. And, you know, if Dolomite, as I say, I think you got some other options. It's not like if everything goes bad from the perspective of, oh, we have a referendum, Dolomite won't give you more time. Oh my goodness, because they were not negotiating in good faith. I don't think, you know, 1, 2, 3, or 200, or however many houses of whatever description are appearing on the site the day after. It's not going to happen. And I think you got some real options here at the town board to stop development, if that's your decision, and I guess you'll know that. I think the referendum will be a pretty clear indication of that. We're not only, we want to stop development here, and we want to preserve the land, and we want to spend the money. What everyone says, we want to get the view of the public. That's all we're trying to do. That's my point.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
That poor lady that wanted to talk about something else, did she go home, or?
It looks like...
She's smart, she did.
We'll have an...
That's really too bad. I think we all should apologize to her. So-
Real quick deal, I just need to mention a couple of things. I mean, I saw the petition, and I read it a couple times, and I just think it's worth noting on the record for people in the town of Penfield that, I noticed that the petition neglects to inform the signer anything about the closing deadline required by Dolomite Oldcastle of January 31st, 2018. I also noticed the petition neglects to inform the signer as to legal requirements of a public referendum and how it could go beyond the January 31st deadline date imposed on us by Dolomite Oldcastle. I also noted on the petition that it clearly neglects, in my opinion, to rightly inform the signer that by signing it, they are jeopardizing everything the town has done to purchase the property and ultimately allows the land to be sold for a massive residential development. And so, I mean, I got to be honest, when you talk about transparency or lack of transparency, or the board could have been more forthright, I think that also applies to what you're doing and the information that is not being provided to the signers, and whether or not, or even petition passers, if they're not aware of what your position has been or what the ramifications or outcomes are if the permissive referendum does not move forward and we do not get an extension on for a public referendum. And I'm not sure that that is actually the right thing to do. I mean, what concerns me here is the petition process aims to block the town from buying the land, and I think it's possibly misleading people. It's giving the impression that by signing the petition, the town will just go hold a public referendum and everything will be fine. There's no consideration nor disclosure of that January 31st deadline, as I said before, imposed by Dolomite to close, not to have a public referendum, but to close on the sale. It is important that people understand what your position has been in the past. In the email that you sent to the moratorium committee and the town board, dated July 8th, 2016, you offered an alternate point of view to the moratorium committee's recommendations. And I'm going to read what that alternate point of view actually was in paragraph 2. And now, in full disclosure, this is not your entire statement. It's a portion of the statement, but it's in paragraph 2. In quotes, after considering the information presented to the committee and the discussions at the committee meetings, I believe the town's long-term interests should best be served by a clustered residential development of Shadow Pines, 210 plus or minus acres, as permitted by the land's long-standing R120 or half-acre zoning designation, close quotes. There's no question that a clustered residential development on the 210 acres, in my opinion, equals a massive residential development. And, it's very clear that you, as a member of the moratorium committee and a vocal opponent to the majority of members who supported the town buying the land in order to prevent a massive residential development, you basically sponsored recommendation number 3, which called for the clustered development of the report on the 210 acres. It is my opinion, and I believe, if I polled the other 21 members, or 22 members total, other 21 members, that you were maybe one, maybe there might have been another person, I will agree to that advocated for recommendation number 3, a massive residential development. So I do think that it is important that the residents who are signing this understand what your position has been leading up to this. And when you talk about transparency or lack of transparency, and the board should have been more forthright, I think that you should be more transparent when you're talking to the residents and when they're signing that petition, because it is not clear to me that they have a full understanding of the issues involved. I believe Mr. Ogie and Mr. Burns also mentioned this, or there may have been one other, that by signing that petition, they are in fact, and if the petitions do qualify, that it's killing this deal. It's killing any potential deal. Now, certainly, as I said before, the town is actively trying to get Dolomite Oldcastle to give us the extension that we need. Mr. LaFountain and Mr. Horowitz are dealing with that every day, trying to get them to do that. And I'm hopefully or cautiously optimistic that we'll be successful, but I don't know. You can't force someone to sell you the property. We can't force them to sell us the property. And so I just think it needs to be on the record of what your position has been on the moratorium committee with supporting recommendation number 3. I believe you basically authored recommendation number 3 for the clustered development, and the actual documented memo that you sent to the town board members and to the moratorium committees expressing your support for the clustered development of that property. So when you say that it's just about a right to vote, I'm not convinced that it's entirely an honest representation of what the petition process is truly about. And I just got to be honest with you. I'm not trying to be negative, but nothing in this petition, and I've got it right here, says anything along those lines. And I think that the voters and the residents, deserve to have that information before they sign that document, because I'm not sure they truly understand what they're signing.
Well, again, I think you're entitled to your view. I think it would be wrong to try to go to the voters and say, here's all of the stuff from the committee, here's the majority report, here's the minority report, here's this. Again, because we're just talking about the right to vote. Because, once it's held, if there is a referendum, I guess we'll have those issues fully ventilated. And, I guess it's not the voters' problem, and it's not your problem either. I mean, it's your problem because you're trying to deal with clearly a devious, perhaps, that's a devious seller who isn't negotiating in good faith. I can't be responsible for that. I can't be responsible for these deadlines. I don't think the voters can either. So I guess we've had an exchange of views. So I say I don't talk to voters, period. And I certainly don't think it would be right for me to, I would never present them with my minority report. It's just not right at this point in time.
Okay.
So I guess we disagree. We agree to disagree.
That's fine. That's fine.
Thank you.
Thank you, Neil.
Thank you.
Thank
Well
you.
taken.
Yes, sir. Please come forward.
Hi, my name is John Backus. I live on 35 Colonial Drive. Yes, that is off the 12th green at Shadow Pines. Sitting home watching this on TV, I'm disgusted. How many voters are there in the town of Penfield?
26,000+.
26,000, okay? We're going to let 685 people make this decision for us. Do you think that that's fair? No, it's not fair. It's not right. I'd love to vote. There's not time to vote. The attorney and all the board members have explained to us the timeline, the 3 months that we lost, the work that Sam and Jeff and Jim have talked about already, have explained that. We elected these people. They're supposed to make the decisions for us, and we can't make them ourselves. That's what it's come down to. They had to make the decision. Oldcastle forced them to make the decision. It only comes along a few times where you have to make a tough decision, and you got to live with it. You want to have the regret? I don't like to have regrets. We let this thing go. We're all going to have a regret that we let this great piece of land go. Question.
Sure thing.
The homes that are being built on the corner of Atlantic and 5 Mile, how are those zoned?
That's zoned R120.
So they're smaller lots than...
Well, so what happens is that they're half-acre lot zoning. There is a section in town law that you're able to cluster, so you can't increase the number, but
Okay.
you can cluster the houses, and then they provide some open space or dedicated land, excuse me, dedicated lands to the town.
Okay.
Within the property.
Within the property.
Within that property.
Within that
For
property.
purposes of timing, unfortunately, that application was going through as zoned before the moratorium discussions took place. That is a planning board application, that was not before us, and
Right.
that is being developed as zoned, but certainly is a consideration given its proximity to Shadow Pines. That's the big picture view we have to not forget.
I mean, it gives us an excellent picture of what could happen out there. Yes, it's a very difficult decision for the board, but we elected the board, and we expect you to make the tough decisions when we don't have the ability to have the timeline to have a public referendum. And in this case, based on all of the facts and the timeline that were given us, I trust these people, and I believe that we did not have the time based on the facts that have been presented to us. They had to make the decision. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Hold on. Mindy? First-time speaker.
My name is Mindy McLaren. I live at 1724 5 Mile Line Road. The development called Windsor Ridge, which is at the corner of 5 Mile Line and Atlantic, is right out our kitchen window. So we've been able to see the changes that that development has affected in that area. I can tell you that those houses go up within days. So if Shadow Pines is to be developed as Ryan Homes, it's not just going to sit there while it takes them time to build those houses. They go up in a matter of a week. The traffic at that intersection is pretty crazy, especially when there's inclement weather. And I have noticed since they've started building those homes there, the accidents have increased greatly. I think that as a founding member of the Save Shadow Pines group, we have done a lot of research. A lot of time has been spent in meetings, in research with members on the moratorium committee. We have, in every opportunity, tried to present the full picture. And I think that by only giving one side to people that you want to sign your petitions is lacking in integrity. I don't think that's fair. And I think that when all is said and done, if Shadow Pines is developed and people find out that they signed a petition in support of development when they weren't given all the information, and yes, they can search on their own, but you're not presenting them that information when you come to their door or you meet them or you ask them to meet you. In the end, you will be responsible for that, and people will be very angry, and you will have to answer and find the answers at that point. Thank you.
Thank you, Mindy. Let's see, is it Jeff Carroll or Carroll Jeff?
I just wondered if you could.
I know, it's such a pain, but we're taping these, and for those that are home,
got your sneakers
they
on.
need to make sure that they hear
It's a
all the
wellness
dialogue.
program.
Besides, I belong to OSHR, and we have to speak into microphones or everybody doesn't hear, because it has a very fine hearing system. I just wonder if we could please hear what the petition said in its entirety. I don't think you were reading the whole thing, were you?
No, I have the petition right here. I'm happy to give it to you. It's a copy of it.
Anybody else want to hear it or see it?
It's online.
Yeah, I believe it's online too, so.
Okay, sorry.
Not a problem. Not a problem. Thank you, Carol. Jeff?
Andy?
Small font.
So again, we're not opposing petitioning with Save Shadow Pines. We're saying don't sign it, okay? So what's the cost of signing this has been brought up several times here. And in fact, the irony to this is that it may, in fact, have the contrary outcome than Neil has suggested here. It will prevent the will of the people. It's been overwhelming, the support for saving Shadow Pines. And if this petition succeeds, it may inhibit the will of the people. So a question I have for our town attorney is, based on the information people have learned and that they continue to learn, if people were to wish to have their signatures removed from Mr. Madden's petition, can that be done, and how can it be done?
I think the...
Into the microphone, Mr. Horowitz.
No, sorry.
We're going to get you into an OSHA program.
I think any of the people that want to have their signatures removed should have to go to the source and find their signature and cross it out.
So may I ask then, would Mr. Madden be willing to receive those people who want to have their signatures removed? Are you that committed to democracy that you would allow people to remove their names from the petition?
Well, hold on. So we're going to get, so you come to us. Neil, you know, Neil.
Absolutely.
So
okay,
he's got the floor.
How should I have asked that?
So you ask it to the board. I mean, we're not going to get into this debate, back and forth. So you can ask that question. Certainly, Mr. Madden, after you finish any other comments, may or may not elect to answer that. You can have a conversation outside afterwards, again.
Right, okay. Well, luckily, he did answer the question and did say that people could strike their name from the petition and that he would receive those people. So I do appreciate that. And then the third thing I just wanted to say quickly is that my preference on this, and I think a lot of people's preference, is that we work something out that works for everybody with Dolomite, that we have a fair deal. Dolomite had offered a good price here that would work for the town, and that going forward, that we continue to work with Dolomite. Dolomite has done some very good things for the community. I know with some of the volunteer work I've done, we've had projects and they've donated stone to us and stuff, and I've been appreciative of the way that they've treated us, and of course we have Dolomite Lodge that we thank them for. So my preference is that we work cooperatively with them, and they work cooperatively with us going forward here. And that we look, and part of the government's purpose is to look in the long term, whether it's 10 years from now or 25 years from now, eventually that quarry is going to cease operations. And part of good government is to look forward and see what the opportunities are there. We'll have a 150-acre lake there. Think of what the value of that property is at that point. And I'm not against all development. There are times where there's appropriate development, and I think that's what the town board is trying to stand for. And when we have a lake like that, it would make sense to have some mixed use of some sort right near the lake, and to have recreation, and to have open space. But we will limit our opportunities if we allow that land to be developed now. If there's a lot of development, we can't have those opportunities. Because if you look at where they're building, or where they're digging, it's right up against the side of the road there, and we're going to have a 200-foot deep lake straight down. What we need is to have that land so that in the future, this town board or some future town board can plan for that. Maybe there'd be some relocation of whale in there or something to give sufficient room so that lake, that the land about that lake can be properly graded so that it can be used properly for recreation, that it's usable. It won't be usable if it's just straight up and down there. So that's the opportunity I want to give to a future town board and future Penfield citizens, and I think we'd be doing a great service for our future, for our children and grandchildren. So anyways, I'll get off my soapbox. Thank you.
Thank you. Carol, you will be a 3-time, so I need to go to Mr. Ward first.
You know, it's
and
after
then
10 o'clock, so we lock the doors and you have to stay for the rest of the meeting.
I'll be very brief, but I have to admit that it bothered me, the attacking that was going on of Neil. And one of the things that I can say is prior to a week ago, I never heard of Neil. I never knew who he was. I never knew what he represented. I went on the website, made arrangements for my wife and I to meet with his wife on signing the petition. We talked to her and actually met with Neil briefly. I would have never known that he was on the moratorium committee. I would have never known what his position was. In fact, my wife and I, when we were on our way home from signing the petition, said, I wonder where he stands on this. And that's where it really bothers me that he was attacked for the way that the petition is presented, because it was never presented that way at all to me. Whereas I can say that some of the council people here have come to my door asking for petitions for them when they're running for election and have never told me what they represent. And I think for him not presenting everything that he represents, he is doing the exact same thing that council people have done when they've knocked on the doors asking for people's petitions for the approval for them to run for election. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Carol. This is 3.5 time.
This was a very carefully worded petition. In the very last paragraph, now therefore the undersigned, being duly qualified electors and legal voters of the town of Penfield, do hereby severely protest against the resolutions.
When you were speaking,
okay,
people didn't interrupt you.
Okay. I think, Mr. Madden, you knew what you would be able to do if you got these 685 votes. You knew it, and you proceeded with something that would serve your fondest desires. And I'm sorry, most of Penfield doesn't believe that, doesn't agree with you.
Thank you. Any other speakers?
Thank you.
Okay. The board will continue on with the rest of our agenda. You're welcome to stay for this very important portion of the agenda. I am getting a little nod, though. We're going to take just a couple of minute break to give folks a chance to, one, exit the auditorium that may wish to exit, and those others to take a little bit of a comfort break. So we will resume in 2 to 3 minutes. Okay, we will continue on with the legislative session of December 6, 2017 Town Board meeting. I have just a couple of quick things that we need to just mention. First, Kathleen McGrail, I apologize to you and to Christina Emery, and I would encourage you both, if you happen to be watching, I would encourage you to come back to the December 20th Town Board meeting, and I'll make sure that both of you, if you're here, you're first on the agenda, regardless of what else we have on the agenda that night, in fairness to you. I think, Kathleen, you wanted to chat about the 2020 comprehensive plan, and I think, Christina, you wanted to chat about pesticides. So if you come back on the 20th, we'll put you first on the docket. The final item, and I'll just read this into a record because this was submitted via the auto-generated email. This is from Maureen Biggenwald, 165 Timber Brook Lane, and her comment is, thank you for agreeing to purchase Shadow Pines. As a 45-year resident, I say yes, raise my taxes, add this property to our beautiful town. Thank you, Town Board, for avoiding another housing and traffic dilemma to our residents. So we'll enter that into the record. In fact, I'll pass that down to Lisa, if we would, please. Okay, we'll continue on our regular agenda. The next item is additions and deletions to the agenda. Are there any additions or deletions?
No.
Seeing none, we move on to our minutes. We have 2 sets of minutes. I'll take the first one, November 8th, 2017. Do we have a motion to approve those minutes?
I move the minutes of November 8th be approved.
And a
I'll
second.
second.
Been moved and seconded. Any discussion on those minutes?
No.
Seeing none, a roll call vote, please.
Cole? Aye. LaFountain?
Aye.
Metzler? Aye. Moore?
Aye.
Quinn?
Aye.
We next have the November 15th, 2017 minutes, and will entertain a motion to approve those.
I'll move.
And I'll second.
Moved and seconded. Discussion? Seeing no discussion, I'll ask for a roll call vote, please.
Cole. Aye. LaFountain.
Aye.
Metzler. Aye. Moore.
Aye.
Quinn.
Aye.
The next item is petitions. Has the town board, town clerk, or town attorney received any petitions since our last meeting?
No.
Okay. Move on to resolutions by function, starting with law and finance.
Authorization for supervisor to sign a license and hold harmless agreement to allow a private sanitary sewer force main within the Penfield Road right-of-way at 1698 Penfield Road.
Moved.
Second.
Be it resolved that the town board of the town of Penfield hereby authorizes the supervisor to sign a license and hold harmless agreement with Ida Schreiner, owner of the property at 1698 Penfield Road, to allow a private sanitary sewer force main within the Penfield Road right-of-way. Thank you.
Thank you. Discussion.
No.
Seeing no discussion, roll call vote, please.
Cole. Aye. LaFountain.
Aye.
Metzler. Aye. Moore.
Aye.
Quinn.
Aye.
5 ayes. Authorization to purchase a Kubota utility vehicle.
Moved.
Second.
Whereas the engineering department desires to purchase a Kubota RTV-X1 all-terrain side-by-side utility vehicle for the amount not to exceed $19,500 from Bentley Brothers Incorporated under state bid web quote 865662. Whereas the all-season utility vehicle will be utilized for the support of the drainage crew and continue the cleaning and maintenance of the town's streams and ditches year-round. Whereas total funds of $19,500 for said purchase are budgeted in the 2017 drainage budget. Thank you.
Thank you. Discussion.
No.
Seeing no discussion, a roll call vote, please.
Cole. Aye. LaFountain.
Aye.
Metzler. Aye. Moore.
Aye.
Quinn.
Aye.
5 ayes. Budget amendments in the general fund, library fund, and sewer fund.
Moved.
Second.
Whereas the registrations and attendance for programs at the Recreation Department require an increase in appropriations for playgrounds youth account from program fees. Whereas the library received unanticipated grant funds from New York State totaling $5,000 for library equipment. Whereas in their monthly meetings, the library board recognized the receipt of this donation received during 2017 totaling $1,599.66 used for library supplies. Whereas the town board decides to have an up-to-date budget in relation to current appropriations and revenues. Now hereby resolved that the attached 2017 budget amendment be approved. For the record, Mr. Supervisor, there are roughly 8 different budget amendments, all ranging from $994 to $2,800. And then the revenue category, there's a New York State grant for $5,000, gift and donations for $1,599.66. And from the assigned sewer debt fund, there is $15,000, and from the sewer fund, there is $15,000. Thank you.
Thank you. I would just note, as part of the body of the resolution, that there's a whereas regarding the sewer debt payments from the assigned sewer debt service fund balance. Questions, further comments?
No.
Seeing none, I'd ask for a roll call vote, please.
Cole. Aye. LaFountain.
Aye.
Metzler. Aye. Moore.
Aye.
Quinn.
Aye.
5 ayes. Roadway dedications for 2017.
Moved.
Second.
Whereas the following developers and owners have made application to the Highway Department of the Town of Penfield for the final dedication of town highways in the town as noted in the following and described more fully on the subdivision plat maps listed below, which have been approved by the Board of Jurisdiction and have dedicated and released the necessary lands owned by them for the proposed highways. Crown Point subdivision, the remainder of Knightbridge Circle and a portion of Crown Point Drive. Silverwood subdivision, Section 6, the remainder of Armitage Luster. Windsor Ridge subdivision, Section 2, the remainder of Stone Ledge Way. Now therefore be it further resolved that the town board accepts the dedication of the roads or portions thereof as described above, all in accordance with Section 171 of the Highway Law of the State of New York.
Thank you. Discussion.
No.
Seeing no discussion, roll call vote, please.
Cole. Aye. LaFountain.
Aye.
Metzler.
Aye.
Moore.
Aye.
Quinn.
Aye.
5 ayes.
Thank you. This takes us now down to old business. Is there any old business to come before the board this evening? Seeing none. Is there any new business to come before the board this evening? Again, seeing none. This brings us to our second public participation. Is there anyone in the audience that would like to address the board on any matter? Seeing none. This concludes all the business before the board this evening. The next meeting, the next legislative meeting of this board will be held December 20th, 2017 at 7 p.m. in this room. And there being no further business to come before this evening, this meeting stands adjourned at 10:23 p.m. Thank you to everyone that participated. Thank you to Penfield TV.